Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to go ahead and call this budget workshop to order. It is 1 o'clock in the afternoon on May 18th. Looking forward to a great, healthy discussion about our current budget and proposed budget moving forward as well. So I think we're scheduled from 1 to 3 today, and of course we'll take as much time as we need to deal with the issue. But I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and have the presentation from staff first, so everybody in the chambers and watching benefits from having the same information. And then we will take public comment for those individuals that have signed up to speak, and then we'll enter into commission questions and comments and go from there, okay? So any questions on the order of the day? All right, any opening comments, anybody? No? All right, I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief and we'll get right to the presentation. I think our presentation is about 30 minutes. It summarizes the agenda material that you have. This is a follow-on workshop to your March workshop of this year. Not a lot has changed since that time, but we have some more information. We've included that information with second quarter budget update for fiscal year 22, the year we're in, to give you a read of how we're progressing with this year's budget, but also a lot of discussion about fiscal year 23. What we hope to gain is feedback from the commission on priorities and direction. We're going to give you the best information we have today. We know that information will continue to develop over the budget process, and we have another workshop scheduled for June 8th. We'll take the information that you share with us today, the direction you give with us today, and we'll come back again for another cut and ultimately move to a proposed balanced budget in July with an approval in September. So that kind of lays out the timeline. Robert Wiggin, our Director of Resource Management, is here with the full team, and they're prepared for a presentation.
So let me just make sure that we're clear. No final decisions on the budget being made today. This is just the next step in the process. We will have a June workshop as well with a proposed balanced budget in July.
Yes, sir.
And then, of course, the process moves through September. Okay.
I'll turn it over to Robert.
All right. Thank you, City Manager. Mayor, commissioners,
Robert.
appointed officials, members of the public. Thank you for joining us today. As the City Manager mentioned, we're here to provide an update. March and April have closed, so we have 6 months of the fiscal year 22 information to glean and gather, and we'll present a brief overview of where we are in the current fiscal year. We'll also spend much of the presentation on the fiscal year 23 budget. The information is the same as we reported in March. The general fund does have a $4 million deficit. We do expect updated property appraiser information, state of Florida reports on revenues. We'll also continue to assess requests that we've received in the budget to see how they fit into our general fund budget, but that's the focus for today. The quick touch point on the fiscal year 22 second quarter update, spending quality time on the 23 budget development and prioritization. And then one action we are asking you to take is to vote on some amendments for the fiscal year 22 budget. There's 3 amendments for capital projects that we're asking that money be newly appropriated or moved to a better funding source. You're familiar with the visual that we're showing here of the city operating funds. Represents the 14 operating funds of the city. 13 are in green, which we use to signal that they expect to be balanced by the end of the fiscal year. You'll notice that we are showing one as cautionary in yellow. Requires some monitoring and analysis so that we can understand how to balance by the end of the fiscal year. It's about $925,000 over budget. The predominant reason is TPD overtime. You did take action earlier this year by amending the noise ordinance. That's not the only reason, but we do expect some changes in TPD overtime, and we'll follow up on on working with them in that respect. It's probably not unusual to be in that position on an annual basis with the police department, but it does require some managing and coordinating by the year end. To discuss the fiscal year 23 budget development and priorities, we'll cover the following. We'll recognize current city commission priorities. We'll talk about maintaining core service delivery. We'll impact, it's very important to remain an employer of choice, and so we'll discuss that within the context of the fiscal year 23 budget. We've got the projected general fund deficit in fiscal year 23 that we'll address. There are some long-term budget considerations, inflationary impacts, and some of the mitigating approaches that we use to address those inflationary pressures. We'll give a general fund overview as well as related to the general fund, talk about the deficiencies fund, and then we'll cover remaining budget requests so that we can put those into the context of the fiscal year 23 budget. Current city priorities are directed by your leadership, the strategic plan, and our mission to be the national leader in the delivery of public services. Of course, we're working to maintain a balanced budget over the years while continuing to improve and expand service delivery. We've done it by master planning for public infrastructure for the most part, making sure that work is efficient and effective, and we're not duplicating work. The city employees are focused on the strategic plan, as you well know. We've created a one-team approach where we don't have silos, but we work across departments to make sure that we're supporting each other in the work that we're doing. What that has allowed us to do is we're using existing resources and connecting to partners, creating synergy. And that allows us to create and expand tempo, create diversity and inclusion office, and explore a team pilot. And we'll talk some more about that team pilot as we move through the discussion of fiscal year 23. At the same time, we prioritize our financial stability to preserve resources for current and future generations. The annual budgets ensure that we are fully funding our pension funds, that we maintain our AA bond ratings, and then we invest in capital investment. And that's, again, directed by our city commission priorities and the strategic plan. We've committed ourselves to 10 new sidewalks per year, new park amenities, public safety technology, repair and maintenance of over 60,000 sidewalk trip hazards over the last 5 years, and then street resurfacing of over 50 lane miles per year. As part of this process of being the national leader in the delivery of public services, we've received validation or verification of the work that we're doing. It comes from GFOA's the annual budget award, the ICMA Certificate of Achievement and Performance Management, clean annual financial audits, and then the AA bond ratings that I mentioned. The national leader in the delivery of public services is also demonstrated in the 5-year strategic plan, accomplishing this even during a pandemic. And you'll see that we've already met or exceeded key targets. We're on track in the TEMPO program to reach over 1,750 disconnected youth, which is 83% of the way towards our strategic plan target of 2,100. We enhanced the city's network of roads, bikes, and sidewalks in a number of areas. And then creating the team, the Tallahassee Emergency Assessment Mobile Unit team, designed to assist in situations where police response may not be necessary, but instead mental health may be the priority. We know that we've got a tight labor market, inflationary pressures, and then also an issue of getting in front of compression, making sure that our employees are fairly compensated. And so the city has prioritized being an employer of choice. In fiscal year 22 budget, we had a 4.5% increase for general plan employees. These include our public infrastructure employees, our community beautification employees, parks and recreation, community affairs employees, and of course, we adjusted for pay increases per the collective bargaining agreements for police and fire. From fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 23, we've reduced the average share of health plan costs for employees so that the city pays 80% of health plan costs and an employee would share in that cost of 20%. We've also realized a 9% increase in FlexBucks for employees, recognizing that these FlexBucks give them choice in healthcare decisions and insurance decisions and being able to pay for copays, prescriptions, that sort of thing. And so that's gone up from $1,870 to $2,145. We initiated a leave buyback option for the second consecutive year in fiscal year '22, and the average buyback was $2,563. We recognize that employees during the pandemic were not able to take their sick leave, take vacations, that sort of thing, and so it was an additional benefit that we were able to balance out with the long-term cost of carrying that liability. We've seen an increase in the minimum hourly wage from $12 to $15 for all our full-time and OPS employees, a total fiscal year impact of $568,000. This was an average annual salary increase of $6,240 for impacted full-time and OPS staff. Critical to continue improving the service delivery, maintaining the one-team approach. We've continued to prioritize being an employee of choice in fiscal year '23. We're recommending a 5% increase with a minimum of $2,500 for all employees earning up to $50,000 in fiscal year '23. This $2,500 increase represents an 8% increase for many of our employees in the public infrastructure, community beautification, parks and rec areas. And it reflects about 41% of the general plan employees citywide that will receive that $2,500 increase. Of course, increases for police and fire are budgeted as required by the collective bargaining agreements. And then as we estimate the fiscal year '23 budget, we are forecasting a 5% increase in the cost of health care. And of course, as we get closer to August and get final plan details, we'll make that adjustment. With a combination of working towards a balanced budget, having the strategic plan for guidance, being an employer of choice, we also remain an attractive community to families and businesses. We do the municipal cost comparison on an annual basis, comparing the cost of services that residents pay, and we recognize that they pay the lowest total taxes, rates, and fees annually among comparable cities. The same is true for our commercial small businesses, and we recognize that they were the most affordable city for electric ratepayers. In addition to the municipal cost comparison, I'd like to point out the ad valorem tax rate that's included in that municipal cost comparison. The city has the lowest ad valorem tax rate, 4.1 mils, compared to 11 other cities in the municipal cost comparison. When we went out and did these surveys, we identified that the average ad valorem tax rate of all the other comparative municipalities is 5.92 mils, almost 44% higher than the City of Tallahassee. So we continue to be purposeful and take the long view of actions to be affordable, to ensure that we're the national leader in the delivery of public services. As part of the next segment of the presentation, I'm going to ask Justin Painter from Strategic Innovation to speak to general fund expenditures and revenues. Justin is our internal expert. He's keeping a pulse on the Treasury, inflationary pressures, and any feedback that we're getting on the economy.
And Robert, before we go to that, thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing I wanted to, in your comparison of Tallahassee with other cities, are there other cities that have as much of their taxable property off the tax roll as the City of Tallahassee?
No, that's a great observation, Commissioner. The city has 45% of its property off of the tax roll, which is the highest amount among the 11 municipalities. They range in 20% increments, where Gainesville might be another city that's close to ours, but we even exceed them by a number of percentage points, yes, with the state capital.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Hey, Justin, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert, and Mayor and Commissioners, good afternoon. These next few slides are going to provide an outlook on the overall health of the general fund, looking at past and current fiscal years and our projections for the out years. On this chart, you've got fiscal years on the horizontal axis from fiscal year 17 out to fiscal year 25, and the vertical axis representing total general fund revenues in increments of $10 million. This first line in purple shows actual and estimated general fund revenues by year. Projected general fund revenues for next year are about $175 million, and that's before we consider utilization of any ARPA monies that are budgeted for revenue losses. What does this mean in context? This dotted yellow line here shows what general fund revenue growth might have been had the pandemic never occurred, and this assumes a 3.3% year-over-year growth rate, which is consistent with prior year historical data. You can see we've regained some ground lost during the pandemic, but we've still not fully regained our footing, and general fund revenue growth is currently forecasted to be more modest in fiscal years 24 and 25. This red line shows actual and projected general fund expenditures, and general fund expenditures are estimated to be $183 million in fiscal year 23, with increases in the subsequent fiscal years. You can see in fiscal year from FY20 to FY21, those expenses leveled out a little bit, and this was due to operational changes that were necessitated by the pandemic, as well as that was the year where we did not award employee pay raises. And the increase in expenditures from fiscal year 21 onwards represents the resumption of normal operations as we came out of the worst of the pandemic, which were then compounded by a variety of inflationary market pressures. And that includes an increasingly competitive labor market, an increase in the cost of contracted services and materials, as well as increasing vehicle fuel prices, among others. And this fourth dotted green line represents ARPA revenues, which, based on the prior direction of this commission, are budgeted at $4 million and $7 million for fiscal years 23 and 24, respectively. When we factor these ARPA revenues in, we are currently, projecting a $4 million deficit for both fiscal years 23 and 24, and that's represented by the gap between the red line and the green line on this chart. Additionally, I think it's important to mention that all ARPA monies will be spent before fiscal year 25, which highlights the need for a long-term perspective to maintain the health of the general fund in the out years. And now I'm going to hand the presentation back to Robert to discuss in more detail the inflationary challenges we're currently experiencing.
We've all recognized inflationary pressures every day in our lives, and one action that the city has taken to mitigate these pressures is when energy prices increase, we've been able to mitigate the budgetary impact. To give you some context, fuel purchases, not only natural gas, but also diesel and gasoline, make up about 21% of our $1 billion budget, annual operating budget. City vehicles drive over 1 million miles per month to deliver services, so we're acutely aware of fuel prices. And that impact to our budget is about $4 million a year. And all we see is projections that energy prices will increase even more in 2022 and level off in 2023 and 24. So as those prices increase, the city successfully mitigated the budgetary impact. We've negotiated gas prepaid agreements to secure natural gas prices at a discounted rate. If you look at the chart to the right, top to bottom, are natural gas prices ranging from $2.30 to $8.30. Or probably for a few days there actually exceeded that $8.30. But for context, this was important to look at. And so with from left to right, then from January of 2021 to September of 2024. We know actual and then estimated natural gas prices. Our prepaid agreement set our prices at $2.50 per British thermal unit. We've seen actual prices in the market at $7 and at times as high as $9, as I mentioned. What this means, practically speaking, is that Since January of '21, we've avoided about $40 million in electric fuel costs for our customers. What it also means is that with these prepaid agreements in place over the near term, that impact could be about $130 million of additional fuel prices that we're avoiding. Could be as high as even some projections today of $158 million. And so we know that that plays into our balanced budgets, our ability to be a municipal cost that's comparatively lowest among other communities where municipal and private utility firms are not able to take advantage of that prepaid practice that we have. With expenses exceeding revenues and knowing about inflationary pressures in the labor market and materials and supplies and vehicle fuel, they're especially critical or especially sensitive in our general fund. So to give you some context on the general fund, we recognize that in the general fund, about 61% of the expenses are personnel cost, and some of those also are in our internal services fund. To the right of the text is a pie chart that shows personnel costs, internal service costs, operating debt, utilities, and other costs as a breakdown of the general fund. You'll notice that the other transfers there is the next largest piece of the pie, and that represents our transfers to other entities, our shared costs with the Consolidated Dispatch Agency, our transition of the monies from the CRA out to those entities, and then our cost sharing with Star Metro and investment in capital. As you all know, several cities rely on the general fund, so we've tried to give some perspective on where that reliance is. It's in our police department, parks and recreation, and neighborhood affairs, public infrastructure. From top to bottom here, we've got our outline of our personnel services, operating expenditures, the costs for each of the funds and departments in the general fund. Across the right top row, we've got a listing of police, parks and recreation, public infrastructure. We've represented the debt, capital transfers, and contributions in a central location, even though they support the work that's done in investing in technology and infrastructure for police, parks and recreation, and public infrastructure. And then we also have represented some of the outside funding that comes to us when you look at housing and community services, which not only is general funded, but also then realizes housing grants as part of their budget. The makeup of the fiscal year 22 budget is $171.8 million. With those additional funding sources from street and sidewalk projects and housing grants, we accumulate $183.1 million. As an aspect of the general fund, a key aspect is our financing the government policy. It provides guidance and consistency for how we make our transfers, how we establish reserves. And most importantly, the general fund, it establishes the deficiencies fund. As we've reported on a regular basis and have provided a plan for restoration, our policy target balance is $28.6 million, represents about 2 months of operating expenses in the general fund. And we know that our current balance is about 72.7% of the target, or $20.8 million. We do expect over the next cycle to restore that. And to give you some perspective, we've provided a graph that shows the deficiencies fund balance history. It really illustrates an overview of the history of the deficiencies fund. As you look on the left axis, you'll see the amount of the deficiencies fund, at that $22 to $28 million range. As you look at the bottom in blue is the balance and then the target. And then we've got arrows to designate certain times that we've made the decision to use the deficiencies fund. In 2008 and 2009, you'll notice that we were at the lowest point responding to the economic downturn, the housing crisis, when we decided not to pass along costs to the consumer, the community, instead use our reserves for that one-time non-recurring emergency. Interesting, as you look from 2009 to 2014, you'll see it took almost 6 years to recover and restore that deficiencies fund. And the reason I point that out is in 2017 and 18, we had Hurricanes Hermine and Irma and Michael. We're experiencing the pandemic in 2020, and our plan looks out over the next few years, and I think we can expect that it could be a 5 to 6 year period before we restore that deficiencies fund. So that's critical to consider. One aspect that's not pictured here is the financing of the government policy. Also, requires us to be fair in how we charge for services. We go about doing regular rate studies and fee studies. I'll point out that in the fiscal year 23 budget process, we're going through a building inspection, fee review, gas rates, and then also Parks and Recreation is considering changes. Of course, those would leave harmless seniors and youth sports, that sort of thing. And again, they would take into consideration the market. You'll also recall that the interlocal agreement was amended 2 years ago for the fire services fee. We implemented a 15% rate increase based on the prior study. As part of that agreement with Leon County, that 15% was put in place with CPI growth in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. We used 1.5% as a reasonable CPI at that time. If we only knew now what we know then, we might have done something different, but that's a fair amount of growth. The most important thing is we also agreed that we would come back and look at the rates and the fees through a study. And that is underway with the expectation that those fire service fee rates will be presented in fiscal year 24 budget. So on the topic of a balanced budget, when expenses exceed revenues, we can look at the sources of revenue. The ones that we have listed on this page, from top to bottom, we've identified the revenue source, the fiscal year 22 revenue, the percent of the total that it is of the general fund budget, the increase we expect in fiscal year 23, and then the amount of the revenue change. The way these have been categorized is to show where we have little impact on their on how they're delivered to us. They're state directed and or codified, so there's really no impact that we can have on changing them. They include public service taxes, the Florida half-cent sales tax, state of Florida revenue sharing, others that include some rental income, interest earnings, mobile home and beverage licenses. As you move from left to right, you'll notice that the total is $54.1 million. We're expecting about a $1.4 million increase in those revenue sources when we prepare the fiscal year 23 budget. We could be optimistic and say that, some of these fiscal year 23 increase percentages that show at 1.5% or 4.5% or 6% might come in higher. But even the impact to our budget would be nominal. You'll notice that public service taxes with 1.5% growth realizes about $300,000 in new revenue. So even
Robert,
0.5%.
so real quick, when you mentioned at the beginning that we're basically starting off $4 million in the hole, that is taking this into consideration, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Great observation. Yes, the $4 million does account for the additional $1.4 million in revenue that we're showing here. On the other hand, there are sources of revenue that the city does control. And from the total amount of those revenue sources is about $115 million. This table similarly is situated to show the revenue source from ad valorem to transfers from utilities to service charges and permits, fine and forfeitures, and others. The fiscal year 22 revenue is noted. Our largest source of revenue is our property taxes at $51.7 million. As you continue across the table, we are, it does represent about 30% of our revenue source in the general fund. And we're estimating about a 4.5% increase in that revenue source based on increased value of properties that are being added to the tax roll. We are working very closely with the property appraiser to understand what new developments and new businesses are being added to the tax roll. and we'll know more in June and July when they issue reports on the tentative millage, tentative values and final values. As you look at the transfers from utilities, that's the next largest area that we have control over. Realizes in fiscal year '22 about $46.5 million in revenue. That's about 27% of our total revenues in the general fund. We are estimating, based on CPI, an 8.5% increase. And just for consideration, that those increases are compared against the total revenues of the various utilities, so that we don't get out of position and transferring too much from those utilities and putting their bond ratings and financial status in jeopardy. Services, charge and payments, fines and forfeitures. Again, you see the original fiscal year '22 revenue, the estimated increase. We are expecting a slight lowering of service charges and permits based on just building fees. Had a large backlog of permitting and working through that backlog. And we'll consider that when we're looking at the building inspection fees. You'll notice at the bottom that we include our ARPA revenue loss funding, and that $3.4 million, we are estimating using $4 million. And so the fiscal year '23 increase there should represent about a 17% increase. Again, as you pointed out, Mayor, these are amounts that we've represented in the budget and are reflected in still keeping with that $4 million deficit. So I feel like I've delivered a lot of gloomy news, but or sobering news, but you know, we have made headway on our 5-year strategic plan, and so that's something we should definitely recognize and celebrate. You know, keeping in context deficiencies, revenue sources that are in our control or out of our control. When we've looked at new investment, we have made an effort to ensure that we are addressing the categories that you see across this page: sidewalk and road repairs, staff pay increases to be an employer of choice, CHSP funding, new sidewalk construction, establishing a larger neighborhood first program, tempo expansion, gun violence mitigation efforts. We've got partners that we work with in that regard, and I'll speak to the additional $1 million that's been requested as a commitment in the upcoming years. The team pilot program, of course, is represented there, as well as the recent Sheriff's Council on Men and Boys. You've seen over the years from fiscal year '19, as we've put in place the strategic plan, that we've increased the investment in these areas from $15.3 million to $23.3 million. And so again, that strategic plan, your leadership has given us the direction to ensure that we're focused on the right delivery of service. One aspect of the $4 million budget deficit where expenditures outpace revenues, and then a challenge within the 5-year strategic plan is maintaining that new investment, but we also have growing requests in the face of that deficit. And we've laid out some of those for your consideration here. One of the City Commission priorities mentioned in January was team unit expansion. We currently invest $500,000. That equates to about one to two shifts during the week. The proposal has talked about increasing that to 3 to 4 shifts per day, or 4 units, and so we're seeking commission direction in that area. We've had external requests that have come in. The Animal Shelter Foundation spoke at our March 9th meeting, and what we have represented here is the current budget that the city pays. That's 55% of the shared costs with the county. They contribute 45%, and the request has been made for $156,000 for additional vet specialists and full-time animal service specialists. The COCA as a board request has come to us to ask about lagging tourist development dollars. The city contributes about $192,000 for administrative and Cultural Resource Commission work. The county matches $150,000 of that, and then the balance of the COCA budget comes from the $1.25 of 1.25 of the 5 cents in tourist development dollars that are generated by visitors and/or local events. The Kearney Center has come to us in this on a recurring basis. We commit about $455,000. The request, we believe, is $500,000. In each of these cases, we have recommendations for those three because we were aware of them as we came into the in preparation of the budget. Because we have existing processes, our recommendation would be that the animal shelter continue to work with Parks and Recreation to work within their resources. We'd ask the COCA to continue to work with existing tourist development dollars. And then in the case of the Kearney Center, they would continue to apply for and follow the CHSP process. Two recent requests that we've gotten in the last few days since we published the budget include the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls requesting a full-time executive director, moving to a full-time executive director, which would move their funding from $20,000 to $48,000 to an additional $48,750. That would be a shared cost that they've asked of the county also. And then the St. Francis Wildlife Refuge, we annually budget $30,000, and they're asking for an increase of $10,000. One last aspect of requests that have been made, the City Commission was clear that $1 million was going to be dedicated to gun violence. In order to put some structure or parameters or opportunity for discussion, the staff put together a plan that looked at what our current approach was. We looked at existing resources. We know that there's efforts on our behalf that are current violent crime efforts, that we know there are programs to address gun violence in the community through CHSP at the current time. We know the sheriff has the Commission on Men and Boys. We know that the Children's Services Council also has a focus on youth and reducing violence in that community. So as we looked at that, where existing resources were and how we could arrange within structures within our government, we identified the $1 million in total investment for the 5 years beginning in fiscal year 23 to reflect additional TPD officers so that those officers could be focused on violent crime and gun violence, and then to put the balance in the competitive funding of the process of the CHSP under a special category. Again, we'd like your priorities. We'll consider the controls that we have. We'll ask for requests for balancing. We'll have an opportunity to bring back any questions that you have at the June 8th meeting. This slide is just an opportunity to reiterate that we believe that we're kind of at a critical juncture. Expenses are outpacing revenues. We're realizing inflationary pressures. And with your clear priorities and progress, we can make it through fiscal year 23. A little more difficulty in fiscal year 24. We try to focus on the current budget and then react and respond as we have better information in the future budget. And ultimately, what we would hope to see is that revenue has time to close that gap that you're seeing in the longer term period of time. But we did want to make you aware of where we see that trend now. With that, I and staff are here to answer any questions. We will ask you to give a direction on your priorities, controls, and requests for balancing the fiscal year 23 budget. We are asking that you approve the allocation of gun violence mitigation funds, give us direction on the structure of that, and then approve proposed second quarter capital and operating budget amendments.
All right.
Thank you.
Colleagues, what I would like to do, if there's any questions of just clarification, we can take those now, but I would really like to hear public comment before we get into the meat of our discussion and questions and everything. So are there, Commissioner Matliff, for clarification?
Yeah, just for clarification on the gun violence the request for new TPD officers, how many vacancies do we have right now for sworn officers?
Mr. Manager?
I think you're in the best position to answer that.
Okay, sure. We currently have 8 police officers that are being advertised, and they're in various stages of active recruitment, whether they're completing the academy and to prepare to transition into that.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, let me ask a deputy city manager to talk about that. So there's 8 vacancies, and they've got a recruiting class, an anticipated recruiting class with some overfills. If you can provide those details, Cynthia.
Yes, and I want to also mention, one of the things that we've done to give greater capacity, the chief has determined that one of the things we keep hearing is the workload of the officers by them not having enough. So the recruitment process is very, very difficult and very challenging. It's a constant process. But we had the ability to convert 23 positions to positions that would add capacity. So those positions are currently being advertised in various states of advertisement, as Abena mentioned. That's adding positions like the community service technicians who offload. We anticipate with the new ones that we just hired, anticipating offloading over 3,000 calls that normally officers would have worked. Again, creating those duty officer positions. We have a recruitment class that's already accounted for in our numbers, and then we have another group that we're processing with an expectation to hire those in July, and then we would be fully staffed at that point.
Mr. Mayor, Cynthia, if I recall correctly, the next class would be larger than the number of vacancies we have today.
Yes, that's correct. So we have the 8 vacancies that have been mentioned. And then we have a class we're anticipating 15. We would utilize our existing vacant positions that are outside of patrol to fill those patrol positions.
Okay. Thank you for the clear.
Okay. Any other questions or clarification? Commissioner Williams-Cox.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Robert, we mentioned on one of the slides about we're anticipating an increase in healthcare by about 5%, but it's still our goal to maintain an 80-20 percentage, okay?
Yeah,
All right,
absolutely.
Just want to make sure that we're going to try to hold those costs down for employees.
Yes, that 80-20 is in policy and will continue
Okay.
in future budgets.
All right, thank you.
Great observation. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, Robert, could you talk specifically for those who are here that might not know what the deficiencies fund is and its purpose? Talk about that and the importance of that deficiencies fund to the city and fully funding it at some point.
Yeah, the deficiencies fund is the naming system that we use for the general fund, but it's common in all funds to have a reserve of some type. The general fund by GFOA policy is recommended at 2 months of operating expenditures of that fund. And so that 16% of the general fund is set aside. And the idea is that it then gives you the capacity to respond to unexpected events, natural disasters, economic downturn. It assists so that it doesn't require you to cut programs for 1 year and then restore the programs for the next year. We use it to front the costs for hurricanes, and so FEMA reimburses the city 85% of the cost of our storm plan preparation and response. And then the state reimburses us 12.5% of those costs. We track those costs very closely in the general fund, and so it takes some time to get that money back. And so we put that money forward in salaries and operating expenses, balanced at the end of the year out of the deficiencies fund to cover those expenses, knowing that those are going to be returned at some point. There's a slight difference than in the economic downturn and or the pandemic in that those were one-time events where we won't necessarily get reimbursement. We, of course, got ARPA monies to replace some of the lost revenue that we realized. But I guess the last observation about the deficiencies fund is that that any end-of-year fund balances in the general fund are used to restore that deficiencies fund. Any land sales would be used to restore, have been used in the past to restore, go first to restoring the deficiencies fund. And then if the deficiencies fund returns to full status, fully funded, it then recommends that financing the government policy recommends using it for certain capital projects that are one-time expenses. We did recheck. I think this was mentioned in the agenda item. We went out and surveyed 5 or 6 municipalities that are in the municipal cost comparison to see what their policies are. We were very much in line with the 2 months of recommended deficiencies fund. Unfortunately, what we did see, though, is most of those do have fully funded deficiencies funds or reserve funds for their general fund, and we attribute that to them not having gone through natural disasters or not waiting for a reimbursement from FEMA. I will say that most of what we show as a less than policy, we've seen quite a bit of that FEMA reimbursement, and so we don't expect a lot of that. What we do expect is the restoration of that over time relative to the pandemic.
And Mr. Mayor, the one thing that I did want to bring to everyone's attention again, because it's very important to what we're doing and how we move forward, our millage rate is at 4.1, which is among the lowest in the state. Is that correct,
Yes.
Robert?
When we look at the largest 25 municipalities, ours is the lowest.
The lowest. And it's been at 4.1 for how long now?
Well, we report regularly that it's we're recommending maintaining that, and it's been for 7 years.
7 years.
Consecutive years.
7 years at 4.1. And then that, in light of the fact that 45% of our property in the city of Tallahassee is off, taxable property is off the tax roll. And that is the highest figure in the state of Florida.
It is the highest figure among the 11 municipalities that
Right.
we compare ourselves
Right.
to, and those are similar in size, similar in delivery of service. Yes.
Okay. So in light of that, then, I think we have been very fiscally responsible here in the city of Tallahassee and doing more, and in some cases exceeding what other communities are doing with less revenue, because so much of our property is off the tax roll. And I just wanted to make sure, Mr. Mayor, that our community understood that. Those who may not understand how all of that works and going forward, how we have controlled our expenses to match the income or the revenue that we've brought in over the years.
Excellent. Commissioner Porter, question of clarification?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Robert, could you clarify for me how much money are we expecting to be reimbursed at this point from FEMA or any source?
Reimbursements from FEMA are now in the $250,000 to $500,000 range for the general fund. Now, we have outstanding reimbursements, larger ones for the electric utility and some for solid waste. But the bulk for the general fund, which we're speaking to, it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. One more, and then we'll get to public comment. Sure, Commissioner Matlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify this because I think it would inform the public. You had a slide, the Kearney Center request. You had an amount there. I believe when we did ARPA funding, we also established a $3 million fund for homeless services. Is that included in what's going to Kearney, or is that yet to be allocated? That hasn't gone through the process yet. Is that?
That's correct. The money you allocated is part of this CHSP process that is currently underway. And we have the citizen review teams that are reviewing that. They're making the recommendation. We expect that around June, July, and that is included in the budget, the total budget that you all will adopt in the fall. So that is yet to be allocated. And yes, the Kearney Center will be eligible. In fact, they have already submitted their application for that. What is presented here is above and beyond that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Robert, let me bring this together, and then we're going into public comment. So we have another budget workshop on June 8th where we continue this conversation and we continue to narrow it down. The July 13th budget workshop is a very important one because that's when you bring us a proposed balanced budget. By law, we have to pass a balanced budget. And then we have the recess time for the public to really digest what's being proposed. And then we come back in the late August, September meetings, have, what, 2 more public hearings before final passage of the budget. But where we are right now, based on the estimates, is we have a $4 million deficit. And this commission has actually provided direction to set aside $1 million specifically for gun violence in our community. So that would make it a $5 million deficit, or does that include, the $4 million number includes that request as well?
No, the
Okay.
$4 million number does include the $1 million that you committed to.
Excellent,
for
okay.
gun
So we're at $4 million deficit right now with a few agenda items today of other outside funding to be brought to the table.
Yes.
Excellent. Mr. Clerk, how many speakers do we have today?
Mayor, we have 20 to 25, 21 to 26, with that one addition.
Okay. So members of the public, everyone that wants to speak will have a chance to speak. At 3 minutes each, we're looking at quite some time. Remember, none of the final decisions are being made today. This is another step in the journey. So I'm going to ask each and every one of you to be succinct with your comments.
And wave if you're in
You can wave in favor of an organization or against. That happens all the time as well. But of course, everybody's going to have the opportunity to speak. Commissioners, Mr. Manager, we were originally scheduled from 1 to 3. That's not going to happen, obviously. So if you need to plan accordingly with your schedule, I'm going to propose a 4 o'clock deadline on this workshop at max to give everybody the opportunity to speak. Good? Okay. Let's move forward. Our first speaker.
Thank you, Mayor. As the mayor mentioned, speakers will have 3 minutes for comments. You'll speak from the podium to my right at that microphone. I'll try to give you a heads up when you get within about 15 or 30 seconds of your 3 minutes. Again, each speaker has 3 minutes. If you want to speak on multiple topics, you will need to combine all of your comments in that 3 minutes. We'll hear from each speaker one time at this juncture. And I do have one individual who has a handout, which I'll pass over to the commissioners in a moment, and that is from our first speaker, which is Lolita Browner, and followed by Kim Galban Countryman.
Thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Ooh, I'm a little short stuff. I don't know.
You can pull the microphone. It moves for you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and fellow commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Lolita Bronner. I am the National VP of Social Dance, and I am the local chapter president here in Tallahassee. It is a national nonprofit dance organization that is dedicated to improve the quality and quantity of dance in the United States through social dance and dance sport and the division of the Olympics. In 2019, Mayor Daley, you signed the proclamation that the third Saturday in June is USA Dance Day, and we've been utilizing that. Thank you. Great. I would like to share a few of the many achievements that our chapter has been able to accomplish through the proclamation and through the grants that we have gotten through COCA, tourism grants, the City of Tallahassee, and Leon County Cares. Thank you all so much. So in 2020, December, we held our first dance after COVID shutdown. 2021, we began to offer weekly lessons in conjunction with the American Legion Post 13. 2021, we held our first district leadership through Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee. All of these people through all the chapters came together here in Tallahassee, and we had a leadership, and we did a mini match dance competition in a ballroom here in Tallahassee. Guests came from Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. 2021, numerous articles were written about the chapter involving the Florida Sunshine Dance in the Limelight and the THL sections of the Democrat. 2021, numerous articles was also written, and we were also featured on the national dance magazine, American Dancer. 2021, the Florida Sunshine Dance is a registered competition event this year with participants from New York, North Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania, and we are still taking registrations. Our organization is art, it's a culture, and it is sport. Recently, I attended the USA Dance National Competition where over 900 entries to compete. There was 23 colleges that was represented.
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you. A 4-day event that would bring tourism. I'm trying to bring a 4-day event to Tallahassee that would bring tourism from all over the United States. And with these grants, I believe we can do it. And so thank you again for all your support, and keep COCA alive.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Kim Galvan Countryman, followed by Kelly Oddie.
Thanks for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Kim Galvan Countryman, 3248 Storrington Drive, 32309. Hi, I'm the CEO of LBB, Lighthouse of the Big Bend. We provide services to babies, youth, and adults with vision loss. According to a new study called Aging and Vision Loss in Florida, conducted by The Ohio State University, Leon County has approximately 17,000 seniors with vision loss. That means they're legally blind or blind, with a large percentage of these being minorities in our poorer communities. This report also highlights the significant reduction in the quality of life and health indicators for this population. Let that sink in, 17,000 of our seniors. And that number doesn't include the newborns, school-age children, and adults under 65 with vision loss. According to the 2021 Point in Time report, there were 621 people experiencing homelessness in Leon County, 621. The CESC received $320,000 from the CHSP process to serve fewer than 621 people. People with vision loss receive $50,000. According to the latest census data, there are 25,475 people under the age of 65 in Leon County who have a disability. You are only providing $154,839 in funding for that CHSB category, services to people with disabilities, the entire category. The City of Tallahassee is providing more than double this amount to the CESC to serve fewer than 621 people. And not only does the CESC want more, they want you to help them avoid any type of competitive grant process. They want you to undermine the integrity of the CHSP process that we have all worked so hard to maintain. Because why? They've failed to incorporate accurate operational costs into their CHSP grant. You have 17,000 visually impaired seniors and over 25,000 people with disabilities out there who are going to want an explanation for why this political body would even entertain a request by the CESC for even more money outside the CHSP process when it is already throwing an incredible amount of money to help 621 people. We strongly encourage the City Commission to deny the operational funding request on page 16. And for the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, please fund us as a commissioner and mother of two adult women. This is very important to us, so please fund them.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Kelly Oddie. She'll be followed by Kate McFall.
Your name and address for the record, please.
Kelly Oddie, 1075 Alameda Drive. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you. I'm here to ask you to please pass or put into the budget the increase that we've requested for the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. I stand here as the founder of the commission, so I was here 11 years ago when we created it. At that time, when we stood up in front of the city and the county, we said we didn't know what the status of women and girls was in this community, and there wasn't any way to gather it. So we really have this group of dedicated volunteers, 97 of them so far, have spent 11 years researching that question and have come up with 142 recommendations that they would like to have an opportunity to at least move the dial on getting done for women in this community. So what we have done over the last 6 weeks is put together about 100 hours into reimagining what the commission would look like if we redid it. And so we're calling it the CSW 2.0. It's really an honor for me to be here and be part of that 11 years later. This revision of the commission is going to be something you all are incredibly proud of. One of the things that you've asked from us and from that group is to tell you what the status of women and girls are in this community and to be able to measure it over time. And we've come up with an idea on exactly how to do that, working with economists and others in the community to develop this digital number that tells you that this is where we are with the well-being of women and girls in our community, that we can measure it over time for the long haul and be able to see that the money that you're investing really does have an impact. When you provide support and services for women and girls, we lift everybody in the community. So for a little increased investment, what we really do is have a way to change the welfare of the community for everyone. So I really want to encourage you to please put this into the budget for this upcoming year. The county is also entertaining the exact same request. We're one of the few commissions or committees in the community that is a joint commission, and we're probably, I still think, one of the only ones where you fund an outside entity, which is the Oasis Center, to provide staffing. And the reason why you do it is because that commission is so busy. Just standing committees alone, they have over 40 meetings a year. Our half-time staff member spends most of their time just taking minutes and records for Sunshine. What the full-time position will allow us to do is to increase the capacity of the commission and to really bring in even more people into doing the work. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Kate McFall, followed by Delilah Pierre.
Thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record,
Good
please.
afternoon. Kate McFall, 1206 Walton Drive. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. Appreciate having a few minutes, and I will be brief, but I'm speaking in support of the requested funds for animal services. I know that's a surprise, but very proud and happy to be a volunteer at Animal Services. We're asking for the full-time positions to be, and then the 2 OPS positions to be converted to full-time. They were actually slated to be converted last year, but because they were vacant, they didn't make the cut. Again, those 2 OPS positions. Recruiting and keeping talent today, as everyone here knows, is harder than in past years, and the benefits package is critical to doing that. The Animal Service Center has a very robust volunteer program. Last month alone, animal shelter volunteers worked the equivalent of 7 full-time staff members, and the number of volunteer hours worked in 2021 on average was the equivalent of 6.3 full-time staff members. So staff is already working hard to maximize the tools and resources that they have at their disposal, and still there are pressing needs. Our shelter is operating below the recommended national standards for animals to staff ratio, and Animal Services has not asked for an additional position in 6 years. The program has grown. Staff is doing more for people and their pets and our community's homeless animals than ever before, all while intake numbers have increased. And it's safe to say that the Animal Shelter Foundation, the nonprofit that works very closely with Animal Services, spends at least $100,000 every year supporting Tallahassee Animal Services and the animals in their care. Lastly, every dollar is valuable, of course, and I know you all take that very seriously, thankfully. This budget request is not the largest line item, but would be a real game changer for your staff, the city staff at Animal Services, who are carrying an unusually heavy load currently, and the community, the adopters, and the animals in their care. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I appreciate y'all taking a few minutes to speak with me. Many of you took a few minutes to talk with me leading up to today, and I really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next is Delilah Pierre, followed by Kathleen Spichal.
Wonderful. Your name and address for the record, please.
Delilah Pierre. I will not be giving my address. I'm the field director of the Tallahassee Community Action Committee, and I came to the City Commission meeting specifically to talk about adopting our people's budget in Tallahassee and also changing specifically certain policies in Tallahassee. I think it's very obvious that like when we see kind of like the lack of funding and the $4 million deficit, that's, you know, a problem in Tallahassee. We see that while like, there may be a low mileage rate in Tallahassee or such, very often the problems persistent in our communities are not stopping, and they're especially not stopping when we continue to fund and give more money to the police. Giving millions of dollars to the police to increase the number of officers and to increase the funding that they get is not going to reduce violence in our communities. We've already seen that from the $3 million increase you gave to the police in the FY22 budget. And so, the FY21 budget. And so we're fighting not just for, a people's budget in Tallahassee, which we've created, which is on our website, tallycac.com, but we're specifically fighting for affordable housing legislation and policy in Tallahassee. We've interviewed over 100 people in Tallahassee, and we found that all of them agree that we need better affordable housing conditions in Tallahassee. Also, these city budget workshops are not at a time that actual working class people in our city can attend. 1 p.m. on a Wednesday is not a time that a working class person can attend. This isn't a meeting for working class people. It's a meeting for business owners and rich people in Tallahassee. That's wrong. We shouldn't have our final town hall be at 5 p.m. on a Wednesday on September 26th, when y'all full well know you've already made all your decisions and are going to conclude without listening or taking any of the opinions into real consideration. And so we should have a town hall or some other kind of public budget meeting before that at a time that is accessible to working class people, preferably on a weekend, but if not, on a weeknight after 5 or even 6 p.m. because people need time to get off work, change, and get ready to go to a meeting like this. Again, we need a people's budget in Tallahassee. We need a civilian police accountability council instead of the civilian police review board that we currently have. And we need especially a change in affordable housing in Tallahassee. Situations specifically like the ones with the Orange Avenue apartments or the large number of vacancies that exist in Tallahassee are extremely apparent about how we can solve those conditions. We don't need more funding for police. That's not gonna solve poverty. We need more funding for people.
You have 30 seconds.
Awesome. And the last thing that I'm gonna say is, I also suggest that we create some kind of real review process for these programs that are happening, such as the Tallahassee Emergency Assessment Mobile Unit. Once again, it's really great that y'all are doing that, but we have no actual data as to how that's being implemented or its success. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Kathleen Spihal, followed by Lauren Perlman.
Great. Your name and address for the record, please.
Kathleen Spihar, 2414 Dover Drive. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Commission and City staff. It's great to be here. I'm grateful to be here on behalf of my sector advocating for arts and culture for local programs. My discussion with City staff about this has been really positive and very respectful. So clearly there is an understanding about how valuable arts and culture is to Tallahassee and the capital city region. And I've seen you at various events around the past few weeks as our sector celebrates these grand reopenings of events and programs shuttered during the height of the pandemic. So thank you so much for being there. We acknowledge the projected budget shortfall the city faces is still being resolved, but there is another deficit in our community, and that is the lack of funding for local-facing arts and cultural programs and organizations. We appreciate the tourism development tax funded that the county allows for our programs and our work in tourism. However, the restrictions on the TDT funds does not cover the rich array of the local-facing programs that address city priorities, like improving quality of life, enhancing city beautification, attracting and retaining talent, and improving poverty through health and wellness, just to name a few. These restrictions have impacted the availability of organizations, like motivating people through arts and crafts who service adults with autism. And Cool Breeze Art and Smooth Jazz Festival Railroad Square Foundation Incorporated, whose year-round programming is locally focused. And the Tallahassee Film Society, who have been driven to offer their virtual programming only due to the pandemic. They've only been able to do that virtually. And there's many, the majority of our grantees and applicants, kind of like the USA Dance has alluded to, that offer arts programs that service primarily local communities. So with more time, I'd share dozens and dozens more. So we need funds that can be used to support these programs so that our community is just really heavily relies on. The city directly supports the administration of grant programs designed to service our arts, culture, heritage programs and organizations. These additional funds that we ask for right now will enhance our stewardship of government resources so that they're diverse, equitable, inclusive, and complete. So help us assist the organizations and programs in our entire community that they all rely on by approving the $300,000 funding request from COCA. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next is Lauren Perlman. Then we'll hear from Deborah Foote.
Hi, Lauren Perlman, 6349 Fitz Lane, Tallahassee, Florida, 32311. And good afternoon. Thank you for having me, Mayor, Commissioners, and City Manager. I just wanted to follow on what Kate was saying. I'm here to support the budget request for Tallahassee Animal Services. And I appreciate the budget presentation ahead of time as well. That was very helpful and insightful. The priority that you have, remaining an employer of choice, is really what this ask is about. The 5 positions, 2 of those are current OPS positions. We also have temporary positions that are doing the cleaning and the feeding at the shelter. They cannot keep those positions staffed. They get minimum, wage, there's no benefits, there's a lot of turnover, and those positions are not positions that really the community and the others that are seeking jobs are looking for. So when you look at that request, please consider that when you look at your priorities. We have here also several volunteers and supporters in the red shirts. Many of us as volunteers work side by side with these temporary staff that are cleaning and feeding, dragging hoses around, pushing pounds and pounds of dog food and cat food and litter. And we enjoy doing that, but we really truly are supplementing their work when they don't have those positions filled. We also like to walk the dogs and provide enrichment and do some of those other things that are necessary for the quality of life for the animals in the care of Tallahassee Animal Services. So while we don't mind, rolling up our sleeves and doing this, we really, really hope that you look at these positions. They are critical for the care of the animals. We want to remain a volunteer group of choice at the shelter and do, other things, including these things. But they are critical, that feeding, that cleaning, that medical care that the animals get. And as Kate said, the intakes are on the rise. The population right now is very large at the shelter. So we do thank you for looking at ways to find funding for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Mr. Clerk.
Next speaker is Deborah Foote, and then Carrie Boyd.
Good afternoon. I'm Deborah Foote, 3006 South Shore Circle. I'm here today representing the Volunteer Advisory Board for the shelter and want to encourage you to deeply consider the request that's before you today. I think that it's important to note that if the positions remain OPS positions, they're going to remain unfilled. If you talk to any of your veterinarians here, they will tell you we have a drastic shortage even in the private market. So in order to compete, we must elevate these positions. I want to thank the animal shelter and all the representatives that are here today. Their work is critical to the success of the shelter, but they cannot do it alone, and the staff cannot do it alone. So please deeply think about this. This is a top priority for the Advisory Council, and I thank you for your time today.
Okay, thank you. Our next speaker, Mr. Clerk.
Okay. Next speaker is Carrie Boyd. She'll be followed by John Bellamy.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, good afternoon, Commissioners, Mr. Mayor, City team. It's really great to be here before you today. My name is Carrie Boyd. I live at 3126 Barringer Hill Drive, and I have many roles in the community, but today I'm here on behalf of the CSWG as its chair for 2021 to 2022. I have served with the CSWG since 2019, and I can say that this funding request that we're seeking is really for all of us. It's for every woman and girl in the community, and it's especially for our governmental bodies, because with this request, we will be able to deepen our impact, deepen our research, and provide you all with better data and information to allow you to craft policies and programs that affect women and girls in a positive way. I know firsthand, having served since 2019, the need for continuity and the need for leadership in this organization in a way that our founding mother, Kelly, helped put in place, but now we have grown to such a need that we do need a full-time executive director. We have a wonderful part-time coordinator, but as you have heard, a lot of her duties are spent compiling minutes and other information. And so with an added executive director, we will be able to deepen our relationships with you all and with the community and work together to increase the social, educational, and economic lives of women and girls. So I ask you to consider strongly and approve ultimately our budget request. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Mr. Clerk.
Next is John Bellamy, followed by Kaylee Murdoch.
Thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Yeah, John Bellamy, 900 Riggins Road, apartment 427. I just wanted to share with you all some experiences that I've had the last few weeks in Tallahassee as you make your decisions on this budget, and hopefully they'll help you make those decisions. So I love to walk the Goose Pond Trail. I have a 4-year-old daughter. We walk it together all the time. 2 weeks ago, I was walking it on a Sunday at noon. There was a homeless man sitting on one of the benches there, and his shirt and pants had holes in them. And his pants had holes in them in a way in which his genitalia was being exposed. And so I walked by him, I came back, and I said, "Hey man, wake up," because he was sleeping. And he woke up, and I said, "You got some extra shorts or something you could put on?" He said, "No." And I knew that if I called the cops, that's probably a waste of their resources and their time. And I knew if they did come and they put him in the justice system, that's probably statistically not going to be a good outcome for him short term or long term, right? So I bought him some pants. I went to Walmart, bought him the cheapest pair of shorts I could, came back and gave it to him. And I say that not because I want praise, but I say it because maybe the best solution for everybody is for some people to take some personal responsibility, right? And so then what happened yesterday is I was walking that same trail, and I sat down on that same bench that that homeless man was sitting on. He wasn't there. And next to me was a trash can full of trash, overflowing, right? And a guy walks by with some dog feces that he'd picked up, which luckily he picked up. And he goes, "Sorry to put this here," and lays it on top of the trash pile, right? I thought to myself, well, maybe somebody will come by and eventually take all this trash. And so what I did this morning when I got up is I walked from that Capitol building down here at 8:15, tried to find out when they would do that here at this building. And when I did that, nobody was here. They told me come back at 9 o'clock. That's when everybody gets here. And so I came back at 9:30. And then when I came back at 9:30, they told me to go to some other building, waste management resource building. I think it was off of North Macomb Street. And they'll be able to help you with that, right? So then think about people who want to take personal responsibility for their environment, whether it's that Goose Pond Trail, right? And when I come here to try and do that, to get that cleaned up, and I'll go clean it up myself tonight if that's not cleaned up, right? I get the burden and I get more responsibility added on me,
You're at
right?
about 30 seconds.
Thank you. So I get more responsibility, and I've got to go somewhere else when I know somebody in this building could answer that question for me. So as you think about putting this budget together, right, maybe you should think about how you efficiently and you do it efficiently and maximize people who want to take that responsibility on and not give them more responsibility of going and find somebody else to do it, right? So I think that is the best option for everybody.
You're
So
at
as you
3
consider
minutes.
that budget, I would encourage you to consider those experiences that I've had recently. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Kaylee Murdoch is next, and then Rob Renzi.
All right. Thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Kaylee Murdoch, 158 Park Brook Circle. Thank you, Commissioners, for taking the time to hear from the community today. My friend and fellow advocate Kate McFall mentioned our robust volunteer program at Animal Services. In 2021 alone, volunteers served 13,225 hours at the shelter. I myself have remained one of the most active volunteers at Animal Services throughout the pandemic and have served nearly 2,000 hours at the shelter in the past couple of years. I say this, like the previous speaker, not to make myself look good, but to explain to you that because of this experience, I have seen firsthand how hard the staff are working while we have an incredible number of animals in our care, particularly large dogs. And if any of you have large dogs, you know exactly how much work it takes to maintain those animals. While we volunteers and the staff are bending over backwards to care for these animals and serve the community, the staff desperately needs more support to be able to continue and advance their life-saving work. This is important both in the context, like we spoke earlier, of remaining an employer of choice and serving our community and remaining an attractive community who provides care for our animals and people. We have to remember that animal services is a people issue as much as it is an animal issue. These are the community's animals, and staff is the front line for ensuring their well-being as well as the safety of the community. As a volunteer and as a community member intimately familiar with the shelter, I strongly support the addition of the three full-time positions as well as the conversion of the OPS position. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next is Rob Renzi. He'll be followed by Jocelyn Flagger.
Good afternoon, Rob Renzi, 6410 Williams Road. Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mr. Mayor. And I'll start with the retirement of Randy Nicholas at 211 and Ultimes at Riley House. I think Kelly and I have the distinction of being the longest-termed tenured CEOs in CHSP and UPHS. I don't know that that's pleasant, but it is true. So I was my 17th year last week. And I'll apologize in advance because I'm not very happy. I've tried over the past several years to keep a policy and personal commitment of coming to these meetings as often as possible, listening as much as I can, and not speaking at all, especially in this forum, under these circumstances. And this request from CESC makes me break that policy. I'm angry because in my 17 years, this is the 8th time I've had to fill out a speaker card for the same agency, doing the same thing. 8 times in 17 years. So that begs the question, why is it always them? Every time. And why do these asks always seem to be the largest during election season? This request should be viewed for exactly what it is, no more than an ill-timed money grab. CESC has access to more than $500,000 currently sitting in the city's bank accounts that's been allocated to them through your utilities program, through CHSP, and through ARPA funding. And they haven't accessed it because they don't want to fill out the forms for reimbursement. The city and county both generously put in, as was pointed out by Commissioner Richardson and Matlow, more than $3 million into the homeless category for CHSP. That category doesn't even meet until June 7th. $3 million. 5 agencies are all that are in that category. 5 divided into 3 million, $600,000, and that's if it's an even-Steven split. So these monies are available to them. Why go around the process? It's just not necessary. I think before we consider these things, your staff has information, please investigate it. Talk to the COC and talk to them about their issues with their current ED and with their billing issues. As part of the FEMA board, this same issue happens there. When the 8 or 10 agencies that we all work together, when there's an increase in funding in the counties, we all increase. When there's a decrease of, like there was this year in FEMA funding, we all ask for a decrease, all but one. This is a pattern of behavior. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Jocelyn Flagger, followed by Mary Deschler.
Good to see your name and address for the record, please.
Jocelyn Flagger, 2518 West Tennessee Street. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. As a member of the UPHS Services Board, I would like to voice my opposition to a request for funding coming before the city's budget workshop in the amount of $500,000 for nonprofit operational expenses. My concern is that any funding request for operational expenses should always be carried out through the formalized CHSP process. To deter from this process for one organization would embolden all human service agencies and drive wedges between organizations already vying for a specific funding stream. Tallahassee is lucky to have organizations working hand in hand to address critical community needs. Formalized operational funding processes promote this synergy and provide official channels for city and county funding. CHSP is a national best practice that we should really all be proud of, and our efforts should be focused on strengthening this process and the mechanisms therein and not detracting from it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
We'll hear next from Mary Deschler and then Stephanie Shoemate.
Thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Deschler. I live at 1339 Hancock Street. I serve as the program coordinator for the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls, aforementioned by Kelly and Carrie. Thank you for having me here today. I am asking you to include the CSWG 2.0 plan in your upcoming budget. What I'm not asking you is if you believe in the advancement of women and girls. I'm asking you if you're going to be a key player in their development here in Tallahassee. It really should be an easy yes. I'm not enough. Part-time is not enough. Volunteers, however dedicated, they're not enough. I'm very passionate. It's still not enough. We really just need more money. An executive director and a database can get the job done. You all want us to be bigger. What we need is bigger funding. Thank you for having me here today. And if you want to see change in Tallahassee, you can be the first step towards it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Is Stephanie Shoemate and then Whitfield Leland.
Hi, good afternoon.
record.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Shoemate. I live at 1500 Milton Street in the beautiful Levy Park area. So thanks for having us today and hearing us out. I am the current secretary of the board of Oasis Center for Women and Girls, and I'm here to show my support for the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. Over the past 10 years, you have shown your support, and we are here to ask for that continued support of this re-envision plan. I was brought to my attention actually about those 10, 11 years ago. I was working for Lorraine Osley at the time and gathered all the data on how many elected officials we had that were women over the past decades. And to be here now full circle and to be serving on the board, I know that it is, as Mary just said, women and girls are important in this community. And Kelly said, we lift everyone up when we support them. So I encourage you to consider that increase in budget in your workshop and just keep the lives of women and girls important in the forefront of your mind. So thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Whitfield Leland and then Stanley Sims.
Thanks for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Commissioners. My name is Whitfield Leland, 527 West Brevard Street. First, I want to say I do support the status of women and girls getting the ED. I think the numbers and what they've done in this community just by volunteering is exceptional. Number two, I really want us to look at and think about what combating violence really look like. Does it really look like hiring more officers? Because if we over-police a community that's already in uproar, you're gonna start a war between the community and the police. And I'm telling you because I'm from the streets. So I'm not bringing something that doesn't necessarily exist, so I'm just making it up. But we really need to think about that. And two, how can we continue to let the homeless shelter come and ask for these ridiculous amount of money, and our numbers are going up every day? They do nothing over there to support the homeless but house them, feed them. That's it. Where's really the programming? And my thing is, I heard Rob said, you know, the question, Rob said, why is it the same agency? But my question is, why is the commission keep giving the same agency these ridiculous amount of money when they got a process and y'all allocate money to them? And my next thing is, don't y'all think we need to do an audit over there or ask them to, you know, show us some numbers or, you know, prove why they need the money or ask what they done did with the previous $3, $4, $5 million we done gave them? I mean, let's, and y'all getting all, y'all hearing all these public requests and people asking y'all, but we not moving. We're not moving as a commission. We're not directing staff to really look at where all these taxpayers' money going at. We ain't doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Stanley Sims, and then the next speaker after that will be Jonna Coleman.
Your name and address for the record, please. Coming up.
My name's Stanley Sims. My wife still lets me be at 1320 Avondale Way. Right here, the little blue section, I was fortunate today, I won a lottery ticket to go to the Chamber's Prosperity Conference. That blue section is our poorest section. So it ain't all over town. It's in a concentrated area. So what am I saying? I'm saying that why do we have a system that makes us fight against one another? I got a dog. I love my dog so much. I mean, all y'all know I love Prince. But it still hurts my heart when I come up here and I see us fund $3 million to an animal shelter, and we taking money that we've designated to help other poor people, and we're gonna snatch it from the people that helping other poor people and give it to these other poor people so that let the people will look good, but the poor people who are helping the poor people will fight each other. Right after a $27 million investment in the Doak Campbell Stadium, and then our mayor says, it's all about, do you support Florida State or not? So now the question is, do you just support those people in that little blue, you don't know who that text me. I talked to a lot of people. So my question is simple. It's just, do you support poor, and I'm finna use the race card, poor black folks? Because who can get to the access to be on the list to be considered a privilege? I have a restraining order against me. I can only come when it's a notice public meeting, even though I've gone to court and a conservative judge selected by DeSantis says that my behavior did not reach unlawful thing.
You're at 2.5 minutes.
I figured he'll say that when I get to that stuff.
Try to help you out.
I love Tallahassee. We got some smart people. I'm just looking at, they say that you could tell the integrity of a city manager by his checkbook. This ain't looking good, people.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Jonna Coleman, and then Amber Tynan.
Great. Thank you for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Jonna Coleman, 2507 Callaway Road, Suite 102, Tallahassee, Florida, 32303. Mayor, commissioners, and appointed officials, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am here representing Big Bend Continuum of Care, a membership organization dedicated to the development of strategies and goals focused on ending homelessness in the Big Bend area. Through federal, state, Leon County, and city funding, the COC serves the homeless population through services provided by our partner agencies. The COC asks that the City Commission consider denying the operational funding request outlined on page 16 of the budget. As the COC currently funds CESC through DCF funding and ARPA funding, which is through the city and county, funding in a total of $545,303, of which $425,916.50 remains in the categories of street outreach, emergency shelter operations, and rapid rehousing funds. DCF funds are available for reimbursement through June 30th of 2023, and the ARPA funds extend through September 30th of 2023. This funding is in addition to any funds that are allocated through the CHSP, DCF, or ARPA funding that comes directly from your agencies. The COC has worked alongside CESC staff since December 2021 to address issues with timely and appropriate reimbursements due to lack of accountability of funds and allocations. We will continue to work with our partner agencies to address these issues and hope that CESC will be able to operate their emergency shelter through the funds that have already been allocated and the future funds that are allocated through the CHSP process without going outside of that process to establish and attain additional funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Is Amber Tynan, followed by Jamie Singleton.
Your name and address for the record, please.
Absolutely. Amber Tynan, 2477 Tim Gamble Place. Thank you so much, Mayor, Commissioners, appointed officials, and staff. I represent United Partners for Human Services. We are a membership organization comprised of over 200 human service organizations here in Tallahassee, and we have a longstanding collaborative partnership with both the city and the county to help enhance and increase the capacity of those agencies. In our work, our agency has remained a steadfast advocate to maintain the integrity of the CHSP process and to ensure that any agency that is eligible and qualifies does not go around or bypass that process. Of all the requests in today's update, only one request meets the criteria for funding through CHSP. Therefore, UPHS would strongly encourage the City Commission deny the CESC operational request outlined on page 16. Taking any other action sets a precedent for other agencies to approach the Commission directly and solicit similar support. We would agree that homelessness is a critically important issue in our community, not only from the community perspective, but public safety. And we remain committed to working with our city and county staff liaisons to have ongoing conversations about what adequate funding looks like for the entirety of this ecosystem. And we actually have time set this summer after this current CHSP process finalizes. Since the onset of the pandemic, all human service agencies have been adversely affected financially. Revenues are continuing to decrease. Demand for services is continuing to increase. But despite that, the city and the county met the challenge, and you have been amazing partners. You've provided 4 opportunities for our agencies to access funding. And of those, CESC has received the lion's share compared to their peers providing homeless support. Of the $2.1 million CARES funding allocated to homeless shelter providers, CESC got $1.3 million. That's 60% of the share. Of the $1.78 million in ARPA funding allocated to homeless shelter providers, CESC received $1.5 million. That's 84% of the share. Of the $797,000 in CHSP funds dedicated to homeless services provided in this current year, CESC received $320,000, which is 40% of the share. And this doesn't even begin to include the COC funding, the United Way funding, or the outside funding that you all provide for utilities and debt service. Couple this with the fact that CESC has money that they have on the table that they could access right now through reimbursement. I think it's upwards of $500,000.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
Encourage you to speak to your staff, as well as the $3 million you all provided in the new CHSP homeless category that they have yet to allocate, that they have access to. We request that you support city staff's recommendation that they do go through the CHSP process, as a fair process was established 20 years ago, and we look forward to maintaining the integrity of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Mayor, I had identified Jamie Singleton, but simply the note there is waiving comment, expressing opposition to the CESC request.
Okay, thank you.
The next speaker would be Kim Shanith, and I believe a similar comment there applies, also opposing that request, but okay.
Your name and address for the
Welcome
record,
to her 3 minutes. She'll be followed by Kayla Norris-Barber.
Hi, Kim Seineth, 3515 Share Road. I stand before you today not to mitigate the impacts of chronic homelessness in our community, but ask for your diligence in weighing your decision. The CSC has had a long history of soliciting operational dollars outside of the established CHSP process. I implore you to analyze the financials and the numbers and words from Amber Tynan, and consider the statements from my other UPHS colleagues. Each vote to approve this request of operational funding chips away at the credibility of the CHSP process. Please heed the recommendations of your staff and stay true to the process. Deny the operational funding request. As our elected officials, I beg you to promote equity among our member organizations, preserve the integrity of the CHSP process, deny this request, and refer the CESC to CHSP where there is established accountability measures. Do this for the future and health of our human services sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker.
Kayla Norris Barber, and then Trish Brown.
Your name and address for the record, please. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Kayla Norris Barber, 527 West Brevard Street. It seems to me that we're kind of treating the symptoms of the problem rather than the problem. We're going to throw $1 million at mitigating gun violence when we all know that poverty is actually the illness and that the gun violence is just a symptom of that problem. And I know you have something in your strategic plan that deals with the impact on poverty, and I'd like to see us spend a little bit more money on trying to eliminate poverty. We talked about a $4 million deficit, and it appears that the deficit is in an out year. So if the deficit is in an out year, are we planning to have a deficit in our budget? And I also noticed that there is almost an equal amount of transfers from the general fund in the same year that we say that we're going to have the deficit. And I'm having a hard time understanding why the increase in the transfer from the general fund is close to the amount of the deficit and what the increase in the transfer is for. Now, I may have overlooked it, but I did not notice that there was a use of fund balance to go toward balancing the budget. And I know that you don't want to use fund balance for recurring expense, but there's a bunch of one-time expenditures in the budget that could be covered by fund balance. And we learned last year at this same budget workshop that we only budget 95% of the tax assessment. So that means that there's an additional 4 to 5% that goes into your fund balance every year. So in that regard, that means that we are basically cheating your citizens out of the resources that could be provided for additional or an increased level of services. That kind of concludes my comments, but I'd like you to seriously consider them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Next is Trish Brown. And this is our last speaker in person. We do have one via WebEx.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us. Your name and address for the record, please.
Trish Brown, and I live on the south side of town on Levy Avenue. And thank you for having me here so I can speak. Again, as the City Commission, you are paid to serve the people. The budget is our budget, and everybody pays taxes here. So our livable dollars are going into this budget. So it baffles me that we are not aggressively dumping money into marginalized, poverty-impacted communities that are struggling. Folks in my communities are dying. Folks in my communities are struggling, and the thing is that that's impacting them as far as trauma. You want to give more money to the police departments. You want to invest in other areas of the community, but the thing is that we need to start aggressively, with conviction, dump money into our poverty-impacted areas. It's been like this for over 25 years. I've lived here for that long, and I still haven't seen any really positive change in regards to the crisis that we are in as far as like in my communities. So my thing is that I just want to tell you that I'm wholeheartedly in support as an individual for the people's budget. The Tallahassee Community Action Police people's budget. I've reviewed it. It's a fair and just budget that actually like reallocates money in the places that we desperately need the support and help. But I don't see this as rocket science. I don't see this as like, you know, something you have to really break your head over to really start to take attention and actually focus on. I believe that our whole entire community can thrive and prosper, and we need to start providing jobs in our communities, our poverty-impacted communities. Give jobs to moms, you know, that are home. Like, we used to, like, back in the day, like, have an aunt or a mother that, like, watched over the communities. Pay them. We had like fathers and brothers that looked out for the folks in our communities as far as safety.
You have 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you. We don't need any more police. It's not going to like make a difference as far as like you having more police in our communities. So my thing is that start paying the people in our community to take care of each other, to lift each other up. Keep kids in school. Watch out for our children. Make sure that they are staying in the classrooms. Start paying them living wages. We need to start working on that. And we also need to start working on low wages. We need protection in regards to housing. We stop the gouging that's like happening in our communities. It's running amok.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And again, my name is Trish Brown. I'm Power People's Campaign, but I do stand, Power Up People, but I do stand here as an individual, hoping that you take care of our people with conviction.
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, please.
Next speaker is Samantha Vance, and that's the last speaker we have, Mayor.
Ms. Vance, are you with us? Ms. Vance, are you with us? Ms. Vance?
Right, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Daley, commissioners, and staff. We appreciate the opportunity to share about the organization and the details of our request today. Our ask is for sufficient recurring funding in the budget outside of any competitive grant process. On April 21st, we met with city staff to begin conversations on having a dedicated line item in the city's budget for CESC, which is the parent organization for the Kearney Center and Health Services Center. During that meeting, I was not prepared to officially submit an amount. However, we had a preliminary discussion estimating $500,000 as the marker to understand the level of support CESC may need. There was a miscommunication in terms of timing of this item coming before you and our knowledge of presenting, and it was my intent to get back to the commission at the June 8th discussion. However, we are grateful for the opportunity to share where we are today. CESC stands for Connecting Everyone with Second Chances, and through the Kearney and Health Centers, we provide free shelter, meals, medical, and dental services for our homeless adult residents who are non-sex offenders and capable of meeting their personal, physical, and mental needs. Providing dedicated funding to CESC will enable the city to avoid further direct and indirect costs regarding our ever-growing homeless situation, which will allow us to serve more people on our waiting list and help more homeless individuals off the streets. We desire a stronger private-public partnership to fulfill society's obligation of human rights, food, shelter, and water. The number of clients we serve daily is an average of 240 adults and a monthly average of 314. We have partnerships with TPD, LCS, PSO and the Public Defender's Office to help reduce crime in the city, along with partnerships with TMH and TCC for health and dental services. In the past year, we've served 754 clients, 56 being permanently housed and 176 diverted. Close to 200,000 meals have been served and over 3,000 clinic visits. We've seen a growth in our waiting list this past year, currently at 72. Through our outreach program, Kearney on the Go, we're addressing more needs of the homeless right where they are. As the city's hub for homelessness, we require more support than a standard shelter due to our volume of clients and services provided. We're in partnership with other human service agencies and shelters under the guidance of COC, but let me share what makes us different. We have a 35,000 square foot facility that offers the most beds in the city and county at 256 with overflow ability of 373. We offer diversion services that help house and transport individuals to quickly divert them from homelessness, limiting emergency shelter entries. We accept and serve low barrier population. We address the crime issue head on with this population through diversion, job support, counseling, case management services, medication assistance, and other services. We provide on-site dental and medical services at no charge. We are the only shelter offering in-house COVID-19 vaccinations with incentives to the local community. We accept clients with mild to severe mental health concerns, overflow from other shelters such as Refuge House and various disabilities. In the past year, we served 23 people from other counties in the Panhandle, receiving approximately 70,000 from those counties. Am I at time?
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Vance, if you could wrap up your comment, please.
We've seen the support of local governments to other shelters throughout Florida, and we would appreciate your support as well.
Thank you, Ms. Vance. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more speaker, I believe.
Yeah, Mayor, we do have one additional speaker, Malik, and I believe the last name may be Jerry, but I'm not sure I read that correctly.
Your name and address for the record, please.
Good morning. Thank you. Good afternoon at this time. Thank you, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem. My name is Malik Gary, and to the commission, I represent Dream Defenders of Tallahassee, and I stand in support of the people's budget brought to you all by TCAT and some of my colleagues that are grassroots organizers. We would love to talk to you all about how we can get this into our budget with you and the city manager. And we also want to talk about, let's move the time of that we have these meetings. We don't have any working class people here that are truly impacted about the budget for the fiscal year. Let's sit down, let's please talk. I'm available to be reached. I've talked to Commissioner Porter already, and we want to support, Tallahassee Dream Defenders is supporting the people's budget brought to some of my colleagues that are grassroots organizers. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers?
None that I have, Mayor.
Ladies and gentlemen, is there anyone else that's in chambers that's with us today that has not had a chance to speak, that would like to speak? We want to make sure everyone's voice is heard. Anyone else? Okay, let's move on to commissioner comments, discussion, questions. I will start off with a quick statement and then move on from there in regards to the additional $1 million approved for reducing gun violence. And I want to speak to this because I was the one that brought this item before us. I am asking the commission to take a pass on any formal action today, and let's give staff the opportunity to bring us back some other options. In the spirit of what I proposed, not that we should have a conversation about the level of support at Tallahassee Police Department, of course, we should. Not to say that we shouldn't have a conversation about the level of support for CHSP. Of course, we should. That's part of the budgeting process. But that was not within the original spirit of the idea that I brought forth. I was more interested in seeing us explore some opportunities, possibly outside of the city of Tallahassee and Leon County. There's some great national models specifically on gun violence disruption on the street level that I would be interested in us finding out more information about. The structure would probably be some type of an RFP process if this is the direction that this commission wanted to go, and then contracting out with organizations specifically for gun violence disruption, but not necessarily just adding more officers out of this particular $1 million for the Tallahassee Police Department and just putting the rest of it in CHSP. And if I wasn't clear at the last meeting, I do apologize, but I think we should give staff another opportunity to come back with some thoughts on specifically gun violence disruptor programs that have proven successful in other communities that we could possibly implement here as well. Some general comments. Let's open it up for discussion. Who wants to jump in the queue to speak? Commissioner Porter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to all the speakers who came here today. I really appreciate it, and I know it takes time out of your day and time to learn about the budget, so I appreciate it. And thank you also, as always, to staff, Robert and your team. I feel like we're in such good hands. I'm glad that you brought that up, Mr. Mayor, because I feel like I'm on the same page with you about that, so I don't know exactly where the disconnect was, but I would like to see us think out of the box a little bit more, and we threw out ideas like Cure Violence or other evidence-based programs that are out there that we could bring to our community. So I'd like to see some more options be considered. I had a few quick questions based on the presentation. Okay, so for that 925,278 that we were over, and a majority of that being for TPD overtime, addressing some of the noise issues, do you have any idea, a ballpark figure of how much of that was TPD and how much of that were other expenses?
The entirety of the $925,000 that the general fund deficit, current deficit is all TPD overtime.
Okay.
It's not unusual to be at that level of overtime at this point in the year. And we are hoping that the mitigating circumstances, the party patrols, the balance of the year may bring that into a balanced budget state, and/or actions we can take in the
Okay,
rest of the general fund.
So we usually anticipate we budget for overtime, but this went above and beyond what we typically budget for. But there is a chance that, given the noise ordinance and other actions we've taken, that number might be less than we're anticipating currently?
Yes.
Okay. I'm curious if we have any information, and I don't expect you to have it right now, but the leave buyback at $2.1 million, we had some comments when we last approved this most recently. I am curious if we have any information on who recovered, like who benefited from that, what amount was individuals took as that benefit was offered, and if we have any information too about their salary or their category. And the reason I bring that up is that some discussion that I had when we were evaluating that, it's a great benefit and I'm not opposed to it. But if we're having people, I want to make sure that benefit is benefiting people equitably at the city, and we know that if you're a salaried position, you don't have to take all the time off to take a call or to go to the doctor, in the same way that if you are an OPS or if you're, in other positions, you don't have the same level of flexibility, and you might not be able to experience, the fullness of that benefit. And that is, again, I'm just wanting to learn more about it and how it's applied, because that is a significant expense. I'm also not sure, and some of the comments in the public asked about this too, and I know some of this is beyond the scope of what we're discussing today, but I really do want to see us focus more on program evaluation and policy evaluation, and where we are seeing our money being spent to the best use and highest capacity, in thinking about, even at some point, obviously not before this budget is adopted, but a review of the $16.4 million from ARPA funding that we used for economic recovery, how that was spent, and what lessons can we learn from those expenditures. Okay, so now those were just some general thoughts and questions. I had a question for, I'm not sure who it's for, maybe Mr. City Manager. How exactly what is the process for these additional budget requests? How did they come to us and be on our agenda? And I fully support all of the organizations, and everyone is trying to do their job, which is to fight for their team. At the same time, I'm sure if anyone could just ask for $500,000 or any amount, they would. So I'm just curious what policy, where did these things come from?
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Commissioner, these are organic requests from the various groups that we're sharing with you that have come to staff. They request meetings and indicate what they may need or ask for. And these are good opportunities. They may do it here at the commission meeting. That's not unusual either. And so as they've come to us, we wanted to disclose them in the agenda item. In fact, there are two more in the presentation that you have today that were not in the agenda item that came during the course of the week. So they just come and we share them with you. Some of them could participate in other processes that are well established. Others that just may not be an option, as they may be included naturally in the city budget. I think the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls is a good example. That's one that's directly funded from a department in the city's budget. You've approved that in the past. So that request would be naturally part of the budget process, and this is the right time to talk about it.
On point, Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Matlow.
Just to follow up on that, is there any limitation who can request funding? If Mr. Sims presented a proposal, would it show up in our budget hearing? Or is there a threshold of who gets included and who doesn't?
Mr. Manager.
Well, I think that there's no limitation. I'm not sure what that would mean in terms of limitation, to the extent that it may even come to commission offices, to the extent that it was available and with clarity, we would put it out there for your visibility. That's what you have in front of you today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Commissioner
Manager.
Porter, you have the floor still.
I don't necessarily have any, solution or idea. I think that on the one hand, this is the eternal struggle. You want something to be strict enough and, to be manageable, to be predictable. And then, of course, you also want it to be flexible enough to allow for extenuating circumstances. And, there are certainly needs that are unanticipated that come up to us. So that might be something for a further discussion at another time, is making sure that we're using best practices, and not that we aren't, but making sure that we are, because as we all know, it's very difficult to be put in these positions of feeling like we're picking and choosing. And although that is our job, I think we could minimize the confusion in some ways. As to some of the specific requests, I have a question about the team unit expansion. What exactly, the additional requested amount, what you mentioned that would expand the hours that we are offering the team unit. Could you just elaborate exactly what that gets us?
Sure, Commissioner, thank you for the question. We have currently one pilot, a unit that is activated, and that team is working right now 7 days actually, but just during the normal business hours. But we know that the crisis needs are beyond those times. And we've seen over the pilot year, the demand for this service has more than proven the need for the pilot. So what we are proposing would be a moderate next step. We know that the capacity has to be considered across the entire organization. And so this would be an evolution of going from one unit to about 3 to 4 units. And what that would do is allow these teams to spread out over more hours, looking at around 18 hours, which is where the data shows us is the majority of the calls are coming along those lines. It would allow for some doubling up so that if a team needs to go do outreach and have extended service for one client, that another team is available to respond. And it also allows some coverage over the week that makes time for leave if one of our counselors, for example, needs to
take some time off. So we're trying to be moderate with the expansion, but know very well that that need has been proven over this pilot year.
Okay, thank you. And to your knowledge, we often approve, grants that TPD gets. Are we aware of any potential outside sources of funding that could supplement this request? I know at this point we can't count on that, but moving forward, is that something we've explored?
Absolutely, and you may recall the commission accepted about $250,000 that we received from DOJ. There is a lot of interest nationally in this program, so we do expect that grants will be available, and that has been a really good citywide strategy to pursue as many grants as possible so that we can leverage them and reduce our expenditure. However, to be clear, there are some grants where it has to be matched with our own commitment. If we don't make the commitment, we're not in the best position to leverage those grants. But yes, we will.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
On point real quick, Mr.
Yeah,
Ford.
I wanted to
Mayor Pro Tem.
add to that, those grant dollars are non-recurring dollars, so you can't hire personnel and make promises to the community, and then those be non-recurring dollars, and we get them for a specified period of time, and then when the grant period is up, we're not able to continue those positions. So that's the other issue we're faced with with grants as well.
Commissioner Porter, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm not going to take much more time. I know we've got more to cover. I will weigh in on the CSC. I think that this really needs to be a larger conversation that we have about the shelter and CESC. And whether or not, and I spoke to a lot of the people who spoke today about this issue, I think that either we make the decision that we enter into some kind of public-private partnership with the CESC where we consider having more oversight, whether it's a seat on the board or access to audits or whatever, and they leave the CHSP process altogether, or we abide by the CHSP process. It can't be both, and which is what we're faced with here. So it sounds like in my conversations there is an openness to have that discussion about what that looks like. I also want to see, and we should have it with the CHSP applications in the past, although the shelter does amazing work, they're not the only people addressing that issue. And so having those numbers, more information would be really helpful for me moving forward in thinking about the equity of the funding. And because I know, it's disjointed. You've got Refuge House, you've got all kinds of people serving that population. So that would be helpful, and I think that needs to be a bigger discussion moving forward. But today I don't think it's certainly that I could move forward with that. Looking at these other requests and thinking through, what is coming up and the fact that we're already at, trying to make up, so please correct me if I'm wrong. When do we expect, and you said even if sort of with the property appraisers, if some of the tax, even with those increases, we're not really expecting that to get us that much closer, that's not going to make a significant dent in the 4 million, correct?
No, we're projecting a 4.7% increase in property tax value. Another 5.7, if we're going to go up another percentage point in the next 3 months, which it typically has not, that would potentially add another $1 million to our revenue. But I'm not real hopeful about that.
Yeah, and then I guess, outside of these additional requests, what is our plan to make up for the 4 million deficit?
Well, what we've typically done in order to address a deficit is look at the deficiencies fund. We look at projects to see if there's extension of capital budgets that can accommodate, a change in the investment in what we address from roads and sidewalks and other construction projects. We also then take into consideration we hold back a portion of vacant positions so that those don't put us in a position to cut additional programs. In this case, that would just offset a portion of the deficit.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, and then Commissioner Diane Williams-Cox, then Commissioner Matlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I first want to thank Robert and his team for the stellar job that you all have done with this budget presentation today. I've been on the commission now for almost 8 years, and have had the utmost confidence in our budget team under Raul's leadership up until here recently, and Robert, the work that you've done, and your entire staff are just phenomenal. And I would have to say, not knowing a thing about any other municipality in the state of Florida, that you rank among the top, if not being at the absolute top. And I sincerely mean that, having watched what you've done with budgets leading up to this point. Two things. Mr. Mayor, the $1 million, I had that same conversation with the city manager during my briefing, using that money to hire additional police officers. I didn't think that that was where we wanted to go with that, but without any direction, any specific direction, the city manager has come back with what he thought we might want to consider. I suggested that he take this to the Citizen Review Board, the Citizen Advisory Council, the Youth Citizen Advisory Council, communities, our neighborhood associations, and get their feedback. But it just didn't sit right with me to add additional police officers unless those officers were dedicated to those areas where we're experiencing the most crime. And we know where those areas are. I might consider it under that circumstance, but yeah, we need to have some more discussion about. Yes. Part of the discussion we had that day as well during the briefing, my aide was the chairman of the, what do we call it at the time? The Cure Violence.
Oh, that brought the recommendation.
That brought that recommendation, yes. And what he said specifically, this was modeled after what they're doing in Chicago. And let me tell you, we don't want to do what they're doing in Chicago right now.
Right.
But it was based on gang activity and identifying specific gangs in the community and using those disruptors to interact with the gangs that were feuding against each other. I'm not sure that in our case, we have identified youth gangs that the disruptors can be used with. So I don't know. But I think certainly we need to think outside of the box and see if we can come up with other ideas of how this $1 million can be spent. If you recall, this was requested by the Justice League or administration or whatever they're calling themselves. But they didn't say how they thought the money should be spent or what programs it should be directed to. And so it was just kind of left out there, and we were left to our own devices to determine how the money would be spent. But certainly, I think we need to think outside of the box and how we can best utilize these funds to address this issue of gun violence in our community. Then the other issue is, of course, the additional funding. I think, and we had this same discussion at the Tourist Development Council board meeting the other day, Commissioner Williams-Cox, where we had a process for the distribution of funds through that organization. And then there was a second process outside of the initial process for people who didn't get their application in on time or it was incomplete. Then there was a third process outside of the two formal processes. And so this thing just got so out of hand and discombobulated, we voted the other day to have one process. You get your application in, it's complete, and you compete with everybody else. That one, process. And so that's where we are with the Tourist Development Council Board at this point. I guess you had to have been around when we didn't have CHSP to see how just out of control this thing was. CHSP has really brought this thing under control and given us a process that people knew what the process was. The projects that are applied for are properly vetted. We have criteria for funding those projects. We have, they are vetted. They have, what's the word I'm looking for? When you evaluate, we have evaluative criteria for those programs. So we've come that far with CHSP. And so I would not be, and I support every one of the requests that have come forward. And I think it's not appropriate for those requests to come directly to the City Commission when we do have CHSP. I really do not think that there should be an opportunity from an individual commissioner, and this is Curtis Richardson, City Commissioner Curtis Richardson speaking. I don't think it should be an opportunity for anyone to go to an individual commissioner to bring a request outside of CHSP or go directly to the city manager or staff. That's what we have the CHSP process for. And so even though I support every one of the programs, I was at Kate's fundraiser the other day, the 5K run, I think it was, Kate, and certainly support their efforts. If we go down that road again, we're opening ourselves up to mass confusion like we had before we had CHSP. And so I would certainly suggest that we stick to what we've got in place through the CHSP funding process and have every organization make their case to the CHSP board for funding and not consider any requests outside of that process as we have decided to do through the Tourist Development Council Board. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. Commissioner Diane Williams-Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, thank you, staff, for the work that you put in to present this. And I see we got a full table here, so thank all of y'all. And thank you to the citizens who took out time in the middle of the day to come out and do this, to be a part of this, and to the department staffs as well. Mr. Mayor, the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to offer a motion that the next budget workshop that is going to be held on June 8th, that it be held at Smith Williams at 5 p.m. in the afternoon.
Okay. I don't even know if we need to.
I need to provide some information on that.
Sure.
Commissioner, that's the same date as a commission meeting. It was going to precede a commission meeting. We could certainly pick another date, but the commission meeting is scheduled to begin at 3. We can do that at Smith Williams if that's the commission's desire.
Let me amend my motion then.
Meeting at Smith Williams.
Let me amend my motion then.
Do that.
That we have the city commission meeting as well as the budget meeting at Smith Williams on June 8th.
Sure. I'll second that. All those in favor, any
Starting at 5 or starting at?
The budget workshop, in the evening at 5.
Okay, so the city commission meeting would begin at 3 o'clock with the budget meeting beginning at 5 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other comment?
We may have some public hearings, so I would have to look at the agenda. If we have public hearings, those start at 6.
Okay.
Okay.
And I would say too, Mr. Mayor, there are challenges to having those remote meetings if we're going to broadcast the meetings.
Smith Williams is set up for that. It's already, that's why I chose it.
Okay.
Because we
Mr. Mayor,
already
if you
have
give us
meetings
just a
there.
second, we can confirm the scheduling of a public hearing. I'm not sure we do, normally we don't, the first meeting. We can confirm that. But I think the direction that you're signaling is, following the commission meeting, we
Yeah,
would
we'll
have
have
the budget workshop. We could certainly arrange that.
Sure.
And if there are public hearings, then we can start the budget meeting and suspend it and do the public hearing and then continue. It will give more people time to get there.
I'll second the motion.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Any further comment? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Okay, thank you. Next, about the $1 million for the gun violence, I think we need to rephrase this. I know that there are those who are calling it gun violence, but what I'm understanding is it's really a drug problem that we're having that's causing the use of guns. So I think we need to bifurcate and not just look at the guns, but look at what's happening before they get to the gun. Bad drug deals and, situations. I'm told just yesterday, Ricketts High School was on lockdown because of something that was going on at Jack McLean while we were at the airport. So it's more than just a gun problem that we have. We have some, and I heard someone say today, we're trying to treat symptoms, but we need to get to the root of what's going on. And we know that the drugs are happening because of the poverty, because of the this and because of that. I think that whatever we're going to look at as a possible solution, it can't just be a gun buyback. It can't just be putting more officers on the street. We've got to help our folks understand that drugs are killing our communities and they're killing individuals. When a gun is fired and someone dies, that's two family members that are no longer with us because one is going to the funeral home and the other one's going to jail. So I think we really need to look at what violence, not just gun violence. Violence, guns are being used, but there's another root cause. So I say that, and I'm a cheerleader for Tempo. I'm going to keep saying that because it is a homegrown program that is helping us curb some of this. We saw it in a report here today, and I think continued expansion of getting people to jobs that pay good wages so that they can have, as I talked about this morning with the Prosperity Conference, have housing and food and shelter, the needs are being met, then we're going to work our way out of this with law enforcement and as needed. But I think we need to look at in that the further expansion of Tempo or programs like at TIFLA, something that helps our young people have money year-round, legitimate money year-round to be able to make a living. Those are my thoughts there. The CHSP process is a process that I value because when I first came to the commission, we had an anemic CHSP process, and we had all these funded outside agency things going on. And we sat here around this table and decided that we were going to get out of these outside funding things and pour it into CHSP. We created a bridge that allowed organizations to go from the outside agency, cross that bridge to CHSP. And United Partners helped with that because there were small mom and pop organizations, and I'm seeing Reverend Ferguson here and then others who were a part of that, who mom and pop shops who needed help getting their paperwork together to be able to qualify for these grants. I think we need to stick with that. We need to stick with staying in this container until the container doesn't work anymore. And I wanted to be clear that I absolutely support the homeless shelter, the Kearney Center, and other shelters that are helping us with our homelessness problem. I sit on the Big B and Continuum Care, and thank you, Johanna, for being here today. There is money already in the community to help with this. The agencies need to tap into the money that is available so that we can stretch these other dollars into other areas that these other agencies may not have an opportunity. Big B and Continuum Care is telling you there's money there. It's a reimbursement. And how many of our mom and pop shops are currently operating on reimbursements? They're having to put their money out there, and then they're having to get it back. And they don't have a staff to complete paperwork to make that happen. And I think that it is only fair, because I've gotten emails because someone has said to their board, email the commissioners. But what they need to tell their board is that the money is available. They need to complete the paperwork to get it. And so I think we need to complete the paperwork to get those fundings. And if for some reason you fall short, then let us know what the fall short is. But I can't believe that $500,000 is the fall short. Again, when I came to the commission, there had been an agreement to give the Kearney Center a total of $500,000, $100,000 per year for 5 years, I believe it was, because I think I came in the middle of that. And Dean, you would remember that. So maybe that's where the 500,000 is coming from, because that's what has been received in the past. But things have changed. You know, we've been through a pandemic and a lot of stuff is going on. Everybody needs help now. So I think we just need to look at staying with the CHSP process and accessing those dollars that are out there before we come here and ask for these precious dollars that we're trying to spread across 200,000 people. I keep going back to that. It's not just the people in the room. It's the people who are not in the room that we've got to take care of too. The next thing is COCA. Now, I love me some arts. Y'all know, y'all heard me talk about the performing arts. I love me some arts, but I did a little research, Kathleen, and you know we sit on the TDC board together, and I asked Carrie, what's going on with this? And so what I've been provided is that the TDT dollars that COCA will receive for, you receive $1.3 million in 2021, and you're slated to get $1.8 million in fiscal year 22 if tourism numbers continue on their current trajectory. And we see what's happening as things open up. We are realizing more revenue in tourism than before. Now, I understand that there's some limitations, that you're limited because there's some statutory requirements of what needs to happen there. But I think, again, we need to, and I've gotten all the emails as well, we need to make sure that we are educating our board and others about the potential to get more money this year than we did last year, so that we, again, can spread these budget dollars as far as we can. And I think that if we're doing that, and as we march down the cycle of budgets, June 8th, and then in September where we actually adopt a budget, if we just kind of march together and see how these things are happening, I think that these requests would either dwindle or find themselves in the CHSP. And Kelly, you know I love me some commission on the status of women and girls. You know I'm a woman. And I love being a woman, and I love young girls. I like being able to mentor them and all of that. But and you and I had this conversation, and what I'd like to see is the recommendations that have been made, that you all have made through the years. I want to see some additional action, I guess. I know that you need help, you know, with another executive director, but I need boots on the ground. You know, if money is needed to fund a girls' summit, money is needed to help a young girl fill out an application for a job or get to college, or those kinds of things. I need some quantified solutions like that, so that I can say, okay, this is what this is doing. This is how, you know, I need some action. Not saying that you don't have any, you don't have any action. I hear what you're saying you're doing, but I need some more, and I need some testimonials of some girls girls who've been impacted by what we're doing, because we can't just be doing it to be doing it. We got to do it to get some results, to get some solutions. And I know that we funded provided some one-time funding, right? One-time funding for the Commission on the Status of Men and Boys, right? Mm-hmm. One time. And I think they know, don't come back, ask for any more, because we've gotten theirs. And so it's not like this is going to be a recurring thing on that side. We've been in existence for 11 years, as you said. I just want to see some action. I think that, and I say this all the time, not just for this organization, but others, and I'm not trying to offend anyone, I'm just trying to be clear We do a lot of talking, but we need some action. We need to see the progress. And many times, folks point fingers at us, the government, saying we're talking and where is our action? And so we're doing our best to try to use what we have been provided to provide the action, the help that is needed with the boots on the ground, not just in offices, but boots on the ground to affect change. We're not where we used to be. We're making progress, but we've got to continue to press the gas, to continue to grow our city, to continue to create jobs, to continue to employ people so that people can have a quality of life and get out of poverty. And so I say all of that to say, these are very precious dollars. And again, I've said this many times, it's like splitting a baby. You know, it's the Solomon principle. There's never enough to do everything that we want to do. I desire to just say, make a motion and say, let's just accept it all. But we can't do that without taking something from somewhere else. So let's work together to figure out the best way to maximize what we have here and keep our city solvent. We've got to keep our bond rating good so that when we need to borrow money, we can borrow money. And you see, Robert indicated, based on some of the agreements that have been made, we're not having to pay these extraordinary price for energy that other cities are because we made some agreements that are still in place that's helping us to save money. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do. So thank you all again for coming. Thanks for making your requests known. Let's work together to figure out the best way possible to get to where we need to get to. And I am happy to roll up my sleeves and come wherever I need to come to have these conversations so that we can get to where we need to get to. So by the time we adopt this budget in September, our employees are still in place and still want to come to work here and not want to go work for Amazon, still can afford health care. We can still do some things in our community for our folk so that they won't leave town, and we can help the people who are coming to town. We're trying to bring people to town. So let's just work together. And you've heard me say this too, and I'm going to end. In the words of the prophet, Al Green, let's stay together. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Matlow, I'm coming to you for comment. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and mindful of time, I'll try to be brief. First, I want to thank all our nonprofit partners for coming down here. Again, I know your time's valuable, and this probably isn't the best use of it. I think unanimously we may have expressed desire not to see these things outside of the CHSP process. And I would like to see them not be scheduled as items or in presentations or discussion without explicit board direction to bring them forward, so we don't waste our own time if nobody wants to see it explored, but also we don't waste the public's time. So I'll make a motion that we bring back a city commission policy doing just that, where asks that are eligible for CHSP don't get agendaed at city commission meetings without an explicit board direction.
Second to the motion. That's for like a second. You have the floor.
Okay. I'm sorry to all our nonprofit partners who may have to come back and do this again, but I do respect. Second to the motion. I'll restate the motion.
So why don't you restate the motion, because the second was out of chambers, and now we can do it again. And Commissioner Porter, I'll come to you for the second, okay?
Sure. So the motion would be to bring back an item for a city commission policy stating that requests for funding by CHSP eligible organizations don't come before the city commission as an item or in presentation without explicit board direction from the city commission.
Okay. The motion by Commissioner Matlow, seconded by Commissioner Porter.
Second.
Yes. I'm not going to support the motion on the table. I'm comfortable with the policy that we have. And plus, I think you have a responsibility for any and all requests that come to bring before the commission, and it is our response. That's why we have budget workshops. And then we deal with it as it comes by. You're not giving well, you are giving a recommendation not to move forward, or you're giving staff recommendation, seeking our recommendation. So I'm comfortable with the policy that we have. Any other comment? Commissioner Williams-Cox?
Yes, I would say I could support the motion with this, that, because I don't know who's CHSP qualified. You know, if they said it to me, I don't know what that means. I would say that for someone who can say to us, staff who will let us know whether they're CHSP qualified, perhaps the request should go, when it goes to staff should let us know if they're CHSP qualified. And if they are CHSP qualified, I don't want to see it. So, but I don't know that if I'm getting something from Timbuktu, I don't know whether they're CHSP qualified or not.
Right. Actually, Commissioner Matlow, I got a question as well. Sure. If you'd be willing to accept a favorable amendment, I would support your motion. We do not have a policy that discourages double dipping. So the county actually has a policy that if you are a CHSP recipient, you cannot even ask for additional funding. If you're in the process, you can't ask, which would take care of the issue that you're dealing with. So really what I think I'm hearing is it's not whether you bring it forward or not. Let's just go ahead and have them bring back at the next city commission meeting a policy that says if you are a CHSP recipient, you cannot, quote unquote, double dip. You cannot ask for additional funding outside of cycle if you are a recipient.
I'll accept that.
Okay, sounds good. The second, Commissioner Porter, you seconded the motion. Are you comfortable with that as well? Okay. Any further comment on the motion on the table? So are we clear on the direction to bring back at the next commission meeting that policy?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously, 5-0. Commissioner Matlow, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, that pretty much addresses the next topic, which is just homeless services in general. We have invested more into homeless services this year through ARPA and other processes, as we learned during our workshop. We're still probably not funding it at the necessary level to address the need, but my understanding, my takeaway from that workshop was we really needed to work on rapid rehousing and long-term investments more so than expanding daily shelter operations. So if there was a desire to increase homeless services spending, that would be my desire to increase it in that capacity, but going through the standard processes. Gun violence prevention, I agree with the mayor and my other colleagues, I guess, not in full agreement of what it looks like, but I mean, the idea is to try something that we haven't tried in this community before to see if we can get a different result. I think a lot of us feel like we've tried a lot of things. I recognize poverty reduction, as Mr. Barber said, is what's going to really drive the needle the most, but are some of these other programs effective at interjecting in the community? And something we discussed previously was restorative justice. I also saw the request from Connections First to look at, I believe the police chief, sheriff, and state attorney had all signed off on looking at expanding an adult restorative justice program. I think that should be in part of the conversation, looking to spend $1 million to interject. I'm 100% in favor of supporting the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls funding. I think what we can gain from that, I think, I don't want to look at it as like we're just funding an agency. When we talk about single women, we talk about single moms, we talk about gun violence and poverty, all these things intersect. And we have seen proposals from CSWG. They don't necessarily have the capacity, I think, to continue to push them and advocate for them. And sometimes they just get lost in the shovel. But what we have seen come from their board, I think, are really great recommendations, and we should be supporting their work. St. Francis Refuge for a $10,000 increase. Inflation's here, and they do a valuable public service. If there's any type of wildlife incident, they're the people we call. You know, they're not calling our office, they're calling St. Francis, and I think that's such a small ask to continue the great work they do. And I know if we see a decline in services from St. Francis, we are going to hear about it. So I would support that.
Mr. Mayor, on point.
Yes, ma'am.
Are they CHSP eligible?
No, they are not.
Okay, that's important to know.
That is very important.
CSC is.
And for the record, neither is the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls.
Okay.
I'm just going down the list. Animal services.
Wait, I'm sorry. You said neither is.
The Commission on the Status of Women and Girls is not.
Okay, because I thought in our conversation, okay, I'm looking at Kelly. I thought that in a conversation that we had, because of the 40,000 that you were saying that you all received, that you couldn't qualify for any other funding? Did I misunderstand that?
Ms. Ida, can you please come to the microphone to clarify, so we have it on the record?
Please.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure, Commissioner, what conversation you're referring to.
Okay.
The CSWG is always been a committee of your commission. It's not an entity and is not fundable by anybody else other than you all.
Okay, we'll talk offline.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adi. Commissioner Matlow.
And the animal services request, Mr. Manager, or can anybody elaborate? I'm not quite familiar other than the dollar amount of what that service request would entail.
Ms. Edwards, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Commissioner, the request is to add 3 brand-new full-time animal care specialist positions, 1 new full-time vet tech position, and to upgrade 2 OPS vet techs to full-time.
Okay. And that's based on the increased need for services that we've seen? That's what?
There is certainly an increase in need for services, but as some of the speakers mentioned, there's a difficulty in getting people to do these types of jobs with no benefits, working at a part-time basis with no benefits. We're having trouble keeping those kind of staff.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That's
Mr. Mayor, may I ask, actually, just to clarify, for my own edification too, is the amount that we've included in the commission materials of approximately $150,000, is that the 55% share on behalf of the city? So
That's
this would
correct.
require the county to share at 45%.
That's correct, Mr. Manager.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I would support that funding pending county approval as well. I adopted my sweet puppy, Betty, at the animal shelter. She had been a victim of somebody firing a shotgun blast and was injured. And she really bonded with my 3-year-old when we went in there. And her brother was there as well. We got one of our friends to adopt him so they could see each other from time to time. It's just a great service, and I think we should continue to support their great work. And the last request that was on the list was COCA funding, and I apologize to Ms. Spihar for missing the last board meeting, but I do think this is something we should consider, and I want to frame it by, this isn't funding for COCA, the organization. This is setting up grant programs for local arts organizations to receive funding. It's essentially pass-through funding, and we hear from arts organizations that don't meet the tourist requirement but are doing good work in our community. So if you're an arts organization that's educational for children and you're teaching children in our community to paint, I mean, rural organizations like the Sharing Tree, you wouldn't be eligible for money based on the tourist requirements, and there really isn't a pool of funding for COCA to make available. So a lot of times when those agencies come, and they're usually the smaller agencies, smaller theaters, they essentially have to be turned away because there really isn't a pool that they would qualify for. I think it would be a lot like the bridge to CHSP, these small organizations and arts organizations that if they could get funding and grow, maybe at one day they could qualify to be a tourist level organization, but those are the people who are getting left out and lost in the cracks. And I recognize the 1.8 million, I think, from the tourist development dollars that was mentioned. But just reiterate, that's all passed through for grants. It's not going to the agency. It's just going directly to people who are doing art organizations in our community. Did I cover everything that was on your list, Robert? I think so. Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure. my position was known. I think largely when we look at the deficit, $4 to $5 million, we do a lot of budget adjustments throughout the year. You mentioned vacancies in different positions, as well as, we see a fluctuation in our deficiencies fund and different transfers and reserves. I know between now and the budget coming back, y'all will do some work and figure out exactly how to make this balance properly. And I trust the city manager can have the city commission's priorities as the focus as it's crafted. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we've got a hard stop in 5 minutes for one of us. And so out of fairness, I'd like to get to some motions right here that I'm going to try to walk us through so that everybody has a chance to participate. So let's look at the recommended action. And what I'd like to do is break option 1 down so that I think we can clear some non-controversial out of the way, and then we can work with the direction on some of the other items, okay? So the first, and I'm looking on my screen here, option number 1, is there a motion to accept the fiscal 22 current year second quarter update and approve the fiscal year 22 capital and operating amendments? That was the beginning of it.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
Properly moved by the Mayor Pro Tem. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Williams-Cox. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously 5-0. From what I can tell, there seems to be a willingness to continue the conversation, knowing that we're still going to flush out possible programs and process for the $1 million for gun violence deterrence in our community. Now, folks, let me just say, this is my 16th year doing a local government budget between the county and the city, and I am very comfortable at this point in the process and with the next part that we're going to talk about of not making a hard decision on some issues, but continuing the conversation, knowing that we're not making a decision to fund or not to fund. What we're saying is we're going to continue the conversation to June 8th. So is there a motion to continue the conversation and move forward the additional $1 million for reducing gun violence in our community?
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved by Commissioner Porter, seconded by the Mayor Pro Tem. Any further comment? Seeing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, passes 5-0. Okay, let me see if I can bring this together and put some of my comments into the final part. When it comes to the team unit expansion, I've listened to each and every one of you, and it sounds like that we want to move forward at least to the next budget meeting and keep that on the table for expansion, even though in the budget challenges that we're facing as we move forward and we get more accurate numbers from the property appraiser's office. When it comes to the Animal Shelter Foundation request, I agree with you, Commissioner Matlow. We all read the same article in the paper not too long ago about the challenges that we're facing. And while we've got an incredible team out at the animal shelter, and we certainly appreciate all the volunteers, I do think it's time for us to continue that conversation on how we can provide assistance. I'm fully in support of the COCA recommendation of $300,000. And Commissioner Matlow, I think you nailed it right on the head. We've got a lot of organizations in this town that would not qualify for the tourist development tax because of the out-of-town beds and heads requirement, yet they're absolutely incredible programs. I'm not saying that we'll be able to fund this, folks, and I want to be very clear, and I think Kathleen knows that. What I'm willing to do today is to continue the conversation to the next budget workshop. The Commission on Status of Women and Girls is not a CHSP-funded project. I was there on the county commission when we created this. It is the only joint commission between the city and the county. It is worthy of a full-time position, and I would wholeheartedly support the funding requests that they have. And of course, you're absolutely correct as well, Commissioner Matlow, when it comes to the St. Francis Wildlife Refuge. You know, this is one of those interesting situations where they're truly a sole source provider. There is nobody else in our area that provides the service that they do, because at the animal shelter, it's domestic animals. This is when we've got foxes, deer, other injured animals that happen. Who do you call? You call St. Francis.
Mayor's office.
Do not call the mayor's office. But you're absolutely correct. They provide a vital service. And I think the request has been stagnant at the same level for several years now. And it's time to consider the funding increase as well. So I'm interested in knowing if somebody would want to make a motion. Again, understanding that we're simply continuing the conversation to the next round. We're advancing these conversations to the next budget workshop for the team unit expansion, for the animal shelter request, for the COCA request, for the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls in the St. Francis Wildlife Refuge.
So moved.
It's been properly moved by Commissioner Porter and seconded by Commissioner Diane Williams-Cox. Is there any further discussion?
I would just say, Mr. Mayor, we certainly need to be clear that this, because we all
Yes, sir.
indicated a support for
Yes, sir.
all of these issues. It's going to come down to how, if we are able
Absolutely.
to find the money to fund them.
Absolutely.
And I don't want folk leaving here this afternoon thinking that because of the direction that we're taking now, at the next meeting, we're going to come back and say, yeah, we can fund these programs.
You are
I don't want
absolutely
anyone
correct.
to leave here thinking that will absolutely be the case.
You are.
We have some fiscal constraints to the tune of $4 million, and that's what we have to keep in mind. I'd love to be able to
Very well
support
said. Very well said.
everything, but
Sure.
yeah.
Okay. Any further comment on the motion on the table? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, passes unanimously 5-0. We have taken care of all the action under the recommended option number 1, on top of the good motion made by Commissioner Matlow to bring back the policy item regarding CHSP. Is there any other business to come before the city at this budget workshop, Mr. Mann?
No, sir.
All right, we stand adjourned.